The wind came in knives tonight, thin and sharp, slipping through wool and leather as if a man's skin were only another layer to be parted. Jon Snow stood where the wall narrowed into sky, where the world fell away on either side into darkness and a faint scatter of firelight below. The yard of Castle Black was a box of moving embers, men crossing, shadows dragging long. Yet up here there was only the grind of ice, the smell of cold, and Ghost's steady heat at his knee. Ghost never liked the ravens. The bird had come out of the night like a thrown stone, wings ragged, its claws scraping for purchase on the parapet. Jon had reached for it by instinct and found it trembling, its breast matted with meltwater, its beak opening and closing as though it wanted to scream. Samwell Tarly had followed, panting and wide-eyed, the hood of his cloak blown back. It's not from here," Sam had said, and when Jon took the little strip of parchment from its leg, his fingers came away stained. Not ink, red wax, smeared by some clumsy hand, or by a hand that had shaken too hard. Jon held the message to the torchlight and the words swam as the flame guttered. The twins. Wolf blood. Do not drink. Do not trust the song. No sigil, no name. The letters were cramped, as if whoever had written them had been pressed for time, or pressed by fear. Yet the words drove straight under Jon's ribs and lodged there. The twins. Robb. Ghost gave a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine. Something in between, a noise that belonged to neither dog nor wolf, but to a creature that remembered older winters than men. Could it be a trick? Sam asked. His cheeks were raw from the cold. His breath showed thick and white. Or someone's cruel jest? Jon stared down at the black yard. Far below, men laughed at something he couldn't hear. Apot glanja. Life went on in its small ways, blind to what might be waiting downriver in the south. Could it be a trick? Sam asked. His cheeks were raw from the cold. His breath showed thick and white. Or someone's cruel jest? Jon stared down at the black yard. Far below, men laughed at something he couldn't hear. Apot glanja. Life went on in its small ways, blind to what might be waiting downriver in the south. I know what it is, Jon murmured. He heard Ygritte's voice in his memory, mocking and warm. You know nothing, Jon Snow. He pushed the thought away like a hand closing on a blade. Sam made a helpless gesture with the paper. The twins that's where Lord Walder Frey lives. Robb Stark is going there to make amends, everyone says so. To marry Edmure Tully, to make the River Lords. I know what it is, Jon said, sharper than he meant. Sam flinched. Jon's anger wasn't for Sam. It was for the distance, for the wall between him and his brother, for vows spoken on cold stones that had seemed so clear until the world dared him to keep them. Boots crunched behind them. Maester Aemon came slowly, guided by Clydas, his teach, in hands tucked inside his sleeves. The old man's face was a pale knot of years, his eyes milky and unfocused. Yet there was nothing uncertain in the way he turned his head toward Jon, as if he could smell trouble as surely as Ghost. Read it again, Aemon said. Jon did, and the words did not change. They only grew heavier. Aemon's breath made a faint hiss. The gods send warnings in strange wrappings. The gods. Sam squeaked. Or greenseers. Or. Aemon lifted a hand. Hush, child. Jon felt his throat tighten. If my brother is riding into a knife. You are a man of the Night's Watch, Aemon said, and there was no accusation in it, only the weight of fact. And yet you are also a son of Winterfell, whether you wear black or no. Ghost pressed his muzzle against Jon's leg, as if to anchor him. Jon looked at his hands. They were red at the knuckles from cold, pale where the skin had cracked. Hands made for a sword, for a bow, for a life he'd chosen because it had seemed the only life that belonged to him. He thought of Robb's grin when they were boys, the way he'd clapped Jon on the shoulder and called him brother without care for bastardy or whispers. He thought of Ned Stark's grave face beneath the heart tree, the words that had bound Jon to this place. The Watch is the realm. The realm, Jon said softly. Aemon's blind eyes held him anyway. Love is the death of duty. the old man whispered, so quietly Jon might have mistaken it for the wind. Then Aemon's mouth tightened. And duty is the death of love. Which death will you choose, Jon Snow? Sam swallowed hard. Jon, you can't. If you go, if the Lord Commander. I know what it means, Jon said. It meant the rope. It meant the sword. It meant being hunted as a deserter. It meant letting this raven's warning rot into nothing while his brother bled in a hall with music and wine. Jon folded the parchment carefully, as if gentleness could keep it from tearing. Sam, he said, and his voice steadied in the saying. Find me horses that can run until their hearts burst, quietly, and food enough for more men than I'm supposed to take. Sam's eyes went wide as moons. More men. Jon looked north, where the dark beyond the wall waited like a mouth. I'm not taking men in black, he said. Not if I can help it. Ghost's ears pricked, as if he understood. As if the wolf already smelled where Jon's path was turning. Beyond the wall, the night had a different voice. South of it, the wind cut. North of it, the wind spoke through the pines, through the brittle bones of old snowdrifts, through hollows where something might be listening. Jon moved in a world he knew too well now, though a part of him still felt like a thief every time his boots sank into the powder. He had climbed, he had ranged, he had bled beyond these towering ice cliffs, but never like this. Never with his vows wrapped around his throat like a noose he'd chosen to loosen with his own hands. He found Tormund Giantsbane where he expected, where men like Tormund always were, even when they stood still, in the center of a living knot of danger. The wildlings were ringed around a low fire that hissed and popped under snowflakes. Their furs were patched with different pelts, wolf, fox, shaggy goat, and their faces were hard with weather and hunger. Some had spears, others axes that had split wood and skull in equal measure. They watched Jon approach with the blank stare of people who had learned not to waste fear. Tormund rose with a grin that looked like it had been carved into his red beard. He was broader than Jon remembered, though that might have been the memory lying. His shoulders were thick as a door, his hands huge and scarred. Frost clung to the ends of his mustache. Well, Tormund said, as if Jon were a stray dog wandering into camp. If it isn't the Black Crow who wanted to be a wildling and failed at it. Jon stopped before the firelight touched him fully. Ghost moved ahead by a pace, silent as falling snow, and the wildlings shifted their feet when they saw the direwolf. They had seen wolves. They had not seen a wolf that looked like a piece of the moon made flesh. I didn't come to trade insults, Jon said. Tormund's grin widened. A shame. I've been saving some. Jon pulled the parchment from inside his cloak and held it out. The wind tugged at it. Tormund took it in 2 fingers, squinted at the words, and then laughed once, a short bark. The twins, Tormund said. A hall full of kneelers and vows and wine. A pretty place to die. It's where my brother will be, Jon said. Robb Stark. The laughter died as if it had been pinched between fingers. Not because the name meant love to these people, but because it meant power. The king in the north. The one who'd sent men to kill wildlings, the one who'd fought the lions in the south. A king, Tormund said, and it wasn't admiration. It was appraisal. A brother, Jon corrected. Tormund tossed the parchment back. And what do you want of me, Crow? You ran from us. You ran back to your ice castle. Now you creep out in the dark like a thief with a bad conscience. Jon felt the truth of it burn. He kept his voice level. The Freys mean to murder him. It's a trap, the wildlings murmured. They understood traps. They lived by them, used them, died in them. A trap at a wedding, a spearwife said, her hair braided tight with one beads. That's worse than killing in the woods. It breaks guest right, Jon said. Blank stares. Then Tormund snorted. Guest right. That's a Southron spell, that is. A bit of bread and salt makes you safe from a knife? I've seen men promise their own mothers a warm bed and a full belly, then leave them to freeze. It matters to them, Jon said. To the river lords. To the north. If it's broken, there'll be no law left but whoever has the sharper blade. Tormund tilted his head. So sharpen yours. I can't reach them alone, Jon said. He did not say, I don't want to try. And I can't ask the watch. They'll chain me before they let me go. Then you're a deserter already, Tormund said cheerfully. Welcome to freedom. It tastes like cold and blood. Jon's hands curled. I'm asking you for men. Laughter again, but uneasy. The spearwife's eyes narrowed. A man with a scarred nose spat into the snow. Tormund held up a hand. Men, he repeated as though tasting the word. To save your king brother from a hall full of poisoned smiles. Yes. And what do we get? Tormund asked, plain as hunger. Jon had expected it. He'd carried the answer like a stone all the way here. Land, he said. South of the wall. The gift. Farms. Hearths. Not raiding. Not sneaking. Settled. The camp went still. The fire crackled loud in the silence. Tormund's grin slipped. For a moment he looked older than Jon remembered. A man who had spent his life pushing at an ice cliff and being pushed back. The gift belongs to the crows, Tormund said. It belongs to no one, Jon said. It's empty, frozen, starving. Let it feed you instead of killing you. The spearwife spat. Crows lie. Jon met her gaze. So do wildlings. Tormund laughed again, but softer. He has teeth, this one, even when he's begging. I'm not begging, Jon said. I'm bargaining. Tormund stepped closer until Jon could smell him. Smoke, sweat, old leather, the sharp tang of frozen ale. If we go south with you, Tormund said, low enough that only Jon would hear. Mance Raider will call me a fool. The crows will call me a traitor. Your brother might put my head on a spike for the insult of my boots on his land. He won't, Jon said, though he could not be sure. Not if he lives. Tormund's eyes flicked to Ghost, then back to Jon. If your king dies, it's no skin off my back. But if he lives, it changes the board. Jon did not know what board Tormund meant. He only knew the shape of his own need. Tormund's smile returned, slow. All right, Crow, he said. We'll go see a wedding. Jon's breath left him, a little too quickly. How many? Tormund turned and bellowed a name. Men rose. Women rose. 12. 24. More came from the trees like shadows stepping into firelight. Lean faces, eager eyes, hands already flexing around axe hafts. Not an army, but a fist. A warband, Tormund said with satisfaction, as if he'd just chosen a horse that wouldn't throw him. Enough to make a mess. Not enough to make a kingdom. Jon nodded. It would have to be enough. Tormund slapped him on the shoulder hard enough to sting. You'll owe me a song for this, he said. A real one. Not that crow croaking you lot do. Jon almost smiled. Almost. Ghost moved in close, brushing Jon's leg as if to remind him that bargains were chains too, just forged in different fires. They slipped past the wall like a secret. Not through the great gate, not with horns and open challenge. Jon chose an old sally port buried under drifted snow, a narrow tunnel of black stone that smelled of damp and history. He had found it on a ranging once, half choked with ice. He had not known then it would become his betrayal. Sam met them there with trembling hands and a lantern hooded tight. His cheeks were wet, whether from tears or melted snow Jon couldn't tell. You'll be killed, Sam whispered, as if the stones might be listening. Maybe, Jon said. Sam clutched at his sleeve. If you go, you might never come back. Jon. Jon looked at his friend. Sam was round and soft in a world that loved sharp edges, but his eyes were braver than most men's swords. Jon put a hand on his shoulder. If I don't go, he said, my brother will never come back. Sames Moat Cailin. He nodded once, furious at himself for understanding. They went out into the night, Jon first, Ghost gliding ahead, Tormund and the wildlings following in a line of shadows and steaming breath. The air south of the wall felt wrong. Warmer by a hair, yes, but also heavier, as though the sky pressed closer. The gift lay empty under snow, a land that had once fed the watch and now fed only crows. The wildlings rode like men who'd stolen their mounts and intended to keep them. Some had, in truth. There had been no time to ask leave, and no lord to bargain with. Jon told himself the horses would be returned, if the world still held such promises after this. They moved hard and fast, eating cold bread and frozen meat, sleeping in short bursts beneath pine boughs when they had to, waking with stiff limbs and mouths that tasted like iron. Tormund complained loudly about southern snow, claiming it was too polite. "Up north," he said one morning as they rode through a gray dawn. "The snow bites back. This snow just lies there like a fat goat." Jon snorted despite himself. "This snow will still kill you if you sleep in it." "Aye," Tormund said, and his grin flashed. "But it'll do it politely." The farther south they went, the more signs of war they found. Burned crofts, a cart half sunk in a drift, its wheel broken, its contents scattered moldy grain, a child's wooden horse. A dead man hanging from a tree, his boots stolen, his face gone gray and stiff. One of Tormund's men, Rolf, called Rolf the Limp, looked up at the corpse and laughed. "Kneeler gods keep their people safe," he said. Jon's jaw clenched. "He's not laughing." "No," Rolf said brightly. "He's dead." That was the difference, Jon thought. The wildlings had learned to joke with death because it never left them alone. The men of the north wore death like a cloak, heavy and solemn, pretending it was temporary. When they reached the first living village, it was a cluster of low huts half buried in snow, smoke curling from one chimney. Dogs barked. A woman stepped out with a hatchet in her hands. She froze at tea. He sight of strange furs and wild eyes behind Jon's black cloak. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice shaking. Jon raised his empty hands. "Jon Snow," he said. "Night's Watch." Her gaze flicked to Ghost and went paler still. "And them?" Tormund swung down from his horse with theatrical grace, which for him meant landing like a bear. "Friends," he said. The woman's hatchet lifted. Jon stepped between them. "They're with me," he said. "No one will be harmed." "Wildlings," she spat, and the word came out like a curse. Tormund's grin vanished. "We're people," he said almost gently. The woman stared at him, then at Jon. "The king's men are marching," she said. "They say the war in the south is done. They say the lions have won. They say the young wolf is going to a wedding." Jon's stomach turned. "Who says?" "Travelers," she said. "Men with empty eyes and hungry mouths. They say Lord Frey is forgiving. They say there will be feasting for 7 days and nights." Tormund laughed, a harsh sound. 7 days, he said. A long time to keep knives sheathed. Jon thanked the woman, left her a handful of coins Sam had pressed into his palm, and rode on. Behind them, the village doors shut like frightened mouths. As the day waned, the land changed. The trees thinned. The snow grew patchy, showing brown earth beneath like bruises under skin. The air smelled of river and rot. Jon rode at the front, his eyes burning from wind. Ghost kept pace, tireless. The direwolf's presence drew the wildlings' wary respect. Even the loudest among them went quiet when Ghost's head lifted and his nostrils flared, scenting something Jon couldn't. "Your wolf sees ghosts," one spear wife muttered. "He sees what's there," Jon replied. "And what's there?" Jon thought as the distant shapes of twin towers rose on the horizon like black fingers, "is betrayal." The rain began as a whisper and turned into a steady, sullen curtain. It washed the road into mud and made every cloak heavy. Jon welcomed it anyway. Rain hid tracks. Rain blurred shapes. Rain made it easier to be a rumor rather than a man. They reached the rise above the green fork at dusk, when the sky had the color of bruised steel. The twins sat astride the river like a clamp, two dark castles joined by the narrow causeway that men spoke of with grudging respect. Torches burned on the walls, their flames flickering in the rain. Beneath them the river moved, swollen and brown, carrying sticks and debris like the bones of dead things. Tormund spat. "That's a fat place," he said. "Stone and water, hard to burn." "Hard to take," Jon agreed. Tormund's warband crouched behind reeds and scrub, horses tethered farther back under low trees. They had ridden with brutal speed, but they were still too few to storm a castle. Jon had never meant to. He studied the movement on the causeway. Frey men in gray and blue shuffled, their spears angled against the rain. Yet there were others too, men wearing cloaks the color of old blood, their banners stitched with a flayed man. Bolton men. Their discipline stood out like a clean blade in a dirty hand. "They're ready," Jon murmured. Tormund followed his gaze. "Those ones aren't drunk," he said, disappointed, as though sobriety were an insult. Jon's mind worked, turning the warning over. Do not drink. Do not trust the song. He imagined Robb inside those walls, smiling for duty's sake, thinking himself among allies. "He'll be inside by now," Jon said. "A wedding feast," Tormund said. "I've been to two. One ended with a man's head in a stew pot. The other ended with me running naked through snow because the bride's brothers were sore losers." Jon didn't ask which part had been worse. He pointed. "There, the outer camps. That'll be where the Stark men are. Freys will keep them drinking." "And your king?" Tormund asked. "In the castle," Jon said. "Likely the East Tower. The Freys will want him where the doors can be shut." Tormund grunted. "So we sneak." Jon had been thinking the same. "We go in as camp followers," he said. "As cooks. As musicians. Anyone can get into a feast if he carries a tray." The wildlings murmured. Some looked doubtful. Their idea of a feast was meat torn with teeth and laughter loud enough to scare the dark away. A hall full of manners would feel like a trap even without crossbows. "One of us can't pass for a kneeler," Tormund said, thumbing his own enormous chest. "Look at me. I'm built like a mountain's arse." Jon's gaze slid to the rain-slicked tents below. "No one will be looking too closely," he said. "Not at servants. Not when they're drinking." Tormund's eyes gleamed. "And if they do? Then we kill them," Jon said simply. The words tasted bitter. Jon had killed before, but this was different. This was murder inside walls under the promise of peace. Yet if the Freys me, and to break guest right, what did rules matter now? Ghost gave a low rumble. Jon looked down and saw the direwolf crouched in wet grass, all white muscle and stillness, staring toward the castles as if he could see through stone. "You feel it too," Jon whispered. Tormund watched the wolf with a new respect. "That beast knows a bad place," he said. Jon's thoughts leapt to another beast, far below in a pen he had never seen. Grey Wind, Robb's shadow. Direwolves were not meant for cages. If the Freys had locked Grey Wind away, it meant they wanted him useless. Jon's mouth went dry. "We need him loose," he said. Tormund frowned. "A wolf's a wolf." "It's more than that," Jon said, and could not explain. Direwolves were not banners or pets. They were the old North made flesh. When they ran, the world remembered fear. "We go in," Jon decided. "Half of you. The rest wait near the river. If we fail, you make the causeway a slaughterhouse when the doors open." Tormund slapped a man's shoulder, then another, choosing quickly. Lean fighters, quiet ones, spearwives with their hair tucked under plain hoods. "You lot," he said. "You can pretend to be servants. Don't talk too much. Kneel if you have to, then stand up with a knife." He turned back to Jon. "And you," he said with relish. "You'll go in like a ghost and steal your brother's wolf." Jon didn't answer. He stared at the twins as the torches burned and the rain fell and the river rushed beneath the causeway like time itself, uncaring. Then he pulled his hood low and began to move. Inside the twins, the air smelled of boiled onions and wet wool, of smoke trapped under stone, of too many bodies pressed too close. Jon moved through it like a shadow with his hood pulled low, his face smudged with ash. He carried a heavy sack over one shoulder, the kind that could hold flour or salt. In truth, it held blades wrapped in cloth, short and mean. No one looked at servants. That was the gift and curse of the lowly. You were everywhere and unseen. He kept his head down, listening. The twins were awake with wedding noise, a constant hum of laughter and shouted orders. Cooks cursed. Scullions ran with buckets. Somewhere a fiddle sawed at a tune, the notes drifting like smoke into corridors where men hurried with meat and bread. Tormund, God's help him, did not blend. He had forced himself into a patched gray cloak and tied his red beard back with string, but he still moved like a boulder that had decided to walk. He carried barrels as if they weighed nothing, grinning at every frightened kitchen girl who darted out of his way. "Don't smile," Jon hissed when he passed him in a narrow hall. Tormund's grin widened. "I'm happy," he murmured back. "I like sneaking. It makes my blood sing." Jon almost shoved him into the wall. They reached the great hall through a servant's arch that spilled them into the edge of candlelight and music. Jon's breath caught, not from beauty. There was none in this place, not tonight, but from the sight. Robb Stark stood at the high table, his crown of bronze and iron catching the candle flames. He looked older than when Jon had last seen him, his face leaner, his eyes harder, as if war had carved him into a different man. Yet when he laughed at something a Frey said, the sound had the shape of the boy Jon remembered. Talisa Stark stood beside him, dark-haired and straight-backed, her hand resting over her belly as if she could shield the life inside from the noise. She smiled, but her eyes kept flicking to the doors, to the shadows in the galleries. And Catelyn Stark. Jon's heart clenched at the sight of her. She sat rigid as a carved figure, her hair braided tight, her fingers white around a cup she did not drink from. Her gaze moved constantly, sharp and searching. She looked like a woman who had smelled smoke long before anyone shouted fire. She turned her head abruptly, and for a heartbeat Jon thought she had seen him. His blood went cold, but her eyes slid past, catching on a Bolton man further down the table, and her mouth tightened. Roose Bolton sat like a pale spider, his lips barely moving as he spoke to a Frey. Even from this distance, Jon could feel the man's calm, the way it sat wrong in a hall that was supposed to be celebration. Jon forced himself to breathe. He could not go to Robb. Not yet, not with eyes on every movement. A line of musicians played near the hearth. Their faces were flushed with ale, their fingers quick on strings. One of them was not drunk. One of them had pale hair too, head under a cap, his gaze too watchful. Frey, perhaps, or worse. Jon stepped back into the shadow of a pillar and watched. Servants moved with platters of roast boar, with bread and bowls of stew. Freys laughed loud, Riverlords forced smiles, and the Bolton men drank little. The Stark men were spread through the hall like a line stretched thin, their shoulders tight even as they tried to join the merriment. This is wrong, Jon thought. The warmth, the laughter. It all felt too sharp at the edges, like a blade dressed up as a ribbon. He slipped away from the hall as quietly as he'd entered, moving down a side corridor that smelled of damp stone. A guard leaned against a door, half asleep, his breath thick with drink. Jon approached with a servant's bowed head. "More ale," Jon murmured, holding up a skin. The guard's eyes brightened. He reached. Jon stepped closer and drove the pommel of his knife into the man's throat. Not hard enough to kill, hard enough to steal his breath. The guard collapsed with a wet wheeze. Jon caught him, lowered him, and took the keys from his belt. The courtyard outside was colder, rain slicking the cobbles. Torches hissed. Men laughed somewhere nearby, their voices blurred by stone. Jon moved along the wall until he saw it. A pen of iron bars, half covered by canvas, tucked against the base of a tower as if someone had tried to hide a shame. Gray wind paced inside, his fur dark with rain, his eyes bright and furious. The direwolf's lips peeled back at the scent of Jon and he snarled, a sound that made the hairs on Jon's neck rise. "Easy," Jon whispered, though his own heart hammered. "Easy. I'm not your enemy." Gray wind slammed into the bars, rattling them. He smelled blood and fear in the air. He knew. Jon crouched by the lock, hands slick. The key turned with a reluctant scrape. The gate swung open. Gray wind burst out like a storm. He hit Jon hard enough to knock him back a step, then whipped away, circling, sniffing the air. His hackles rose. He let out a low, rolling growl that seemed to vibrate in the stones. "Go," Jon whispered fiercely, pointing toward the darkness beyond the courtyard, toward the outer camps. "Find your master, now." Gray wind bounded into the rain, a shadow streaking across torchlight. For a moment Jon stood there, drenched and shaking, feeling as if he had just loosed something ancient and holy into a place that deserved neither. In the hall, the music changed. A new tune began, slow and measured, the notes heavy as footsteps. Jon's stomach dropped. He knew that song. Everyone knew it. The Rains of Castamere. The first bolt struck a man in the throat before anyone understood the song had teeth. It happened in a blink, the twang of a crossbow string lost under the music, the wet sound of impact, a river lord clutching at his neck as red bubbled between his fingers. For half a breath the hall froze, as if the world itself needed time to believe what it had seen. Then the doors slammed shut with a thunderous crash, and the music swelled, and the killing began. Screams ripped through laughter. Cups shattered. Men lurched to their feet only to be knocked back by the press of bodies. Crossbow bolts rained from the galleries like black hail, thudding into flesh, into wood, into the stone near Robb's head. Robb Stark turned, bewilderment on his face for the space of a heartbeat, and then anger carved it away. He reached for his sword, only to find it missing, taken, stolen. A wedding courtesy turned into a murder's convenience. Catelyn Stark rose so fast her chair toppled behind her. Her eyes flashed over the hall, over the locked doors, the balconies full of Frey men with crossbows, over the Bolton faces that did not look surprised. "No," she breathed, and then louder, "No!" A Frey shouted, "The king is dead," as if saying it could make it true. Talisa Stark cried out, hands over her belly, as men surged around her. Someone grabbed her arm. She wrenched free. A bolt struck the table beside her, splintering wood. She stared at it as though it were a snake. Jon ran. He had been in the corridor when the song began. He heard the first scream and his blood turned to ice. He shoved through servants who panicked, through cooks who fled, his knife already in his hand. Behind him, Tormund bellowed, an animal sound of joy and rage, and the warband moved like a released spring. They hit the side door like a battering ram. The hall exploded into their faces, heat and noise and the metallic stink of blood. Jon saw a Frey crossbowman turn, mouth opening to shout, and Jon's knife flew from his hand and buried itself in the man's eye. The man fell without sound. Wildlings poured in, axes swinging, spears thrusting. They did not hesitate. They did not ask who deserved to die. They saw men with weapons raised against trapped guests, and their instincts named it what it was: slaughter. Tormund Giantsbane waded into the chaos with a roar, his axe rising and falling like a woodcutter's, splitting a Frey from shoulder to breastbone. Blood sprayed, dark in torchlight. Tormund laughed, mad with it. "Now this is a feast," he shouted. Jon's eyes found Robb. Robb was on his feet, dragging Talisa behind him, trying to shield her with his own body as bolts snapped past. A Bolton man stepped close. Roose Bolton himself, pale and calm, his hand hidden beneath his cloak. Jon saw the movement. He saw the glint of steel in the candlelight. He saw the exact moment betrayal decided to become action. "No!" Jon shouted, and the word tore out of him like it had been waiting all his life. He shoved through the crush, shoulder barging a river lord aside, leaping over a fallen bench. Roose's arm came out, the dagger aimed for Robb's ribs. Jon caught Roose's wrist in mid-strike. The force jarred his arm up to the shoulder. Roose's eyes flicked to Jon, mild interest in them, as if he'd found a spider in his soup. "Snow," Roose murmured, as if they were meeting in a corridor of Winterfell. Jon snarled and twisted. Roose's dagger clattered to the floor. Roose moved with surprising speed, the calm face unchanged, his other hand reaching for a hidden blade. Jon had no time for duels. He slammed his forehead into Roose's nose. Bone cracked. Roose reeled, blood streaming. the first expression on his face not pain but annoyance. Robb stared at Jon, stunned. "Jon, move!" Jon barked. "Get her out!" Talisa's eyes were huge, her breath coming fast. Robb grabbed her, pulling her toward the edge of the hall where wildlings had overturned tables into makeshift barricades. A spear wife snarled at them to duck, her spear skewering a Frey who tried to climb over. Catelyn Stark stood on the high table now, a dagger in her hand, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Stop!" she screamed at Walder Frey's sons, though Walder himself was nowhere to be seen. "Stop this madness. You will be cursed." A Frey man grabbed her from behind. Another shoved a knife to her throat. Catelyn froze, her breath hitching, fury and fear warring in her eyes. "Mother!" Robb shouted, but another bolt thudded into the wood near his head and he ducked, dragging Talisa down with him. Jon lunged toward Catelyn, but a crossbow bolt clipped his shoulder, tearing through cloth and flesh. Pain flared white. He stumbled, then recovered, teeth bared, vision narrowing. The hall was a storm. Men died screaming. Men died quiet. Wine spilled and ran red like blood, and blood ran darker than wine. The song kept playing because the musicians were forced to, because the Freys wanted the music to be their laughter. Jon saw Tormund fling a bench into the air, saw it crash into a line of crossbowmen scrambling down from the gallery stairs. He saw wildlings climbing those stairs like wolves up a hill, knives flashing. And then he saw Grey Wind. The direwolf burst into the hall through a side entrance, wet fur bristling, eyes blazing. He hit a Frey man and tore him down, jaws closing on a throat. The hall screamed again, louder, because a wolf in a wedding was not just death. It was a curse made flesh. For a heartbeat, the Freys hesitated. That heartbeat was all Jon needed. Catelyn Stark was being pulled away. Jon caught the glimpse through bodies. A flash of her gray hair, her hands clawing at the arm that gripped her, the knife at her throat steady and cruel. She vanished through a side door, the Freys dragging her like a prize. Jon moved without thinking. He shoved past a dying man, stepped over a fallen cupbearer, and slammed into the door just as it swung shut. His shoulder hit wood. Pain flared. The bolt wound burned. He growled and forced it open. The corridor beyond was narrower, colder, lit by fewer torches. Smoke drifted here too, curling from the hall like a spirit escaping. The sound of slaughter muffled behind stone, but it still throbbed, a heartbeat of violence. Two Frey men looked back in surprise. One had Catelyn by the arm, the other kept the knife at her throat. Her eyes met Jon's and something fierce sparked there. A mother's defiance even with steel against her skin. Jon's sword was in his hand now. He didn't remember drawing it. He only remembered needing it. "Let her go," Jon said, voice low. The Frey with the knife sneered. "And who are you, servant?" "Another Stark pup come to die." Jon stepped forward. "Jon Snow." The name landed. The man's sneer faltered. Even south, the bastards of Winterfell were whispered about. Catelyn's breath caught. "Jon," she whispered, as if the world had turned mad enough to give her a ghost. The Frey jerked the knife tighter. "Back!" he snapped, and the blade bit skin. A bead of blood slid down Catelyn's throat. Jon's vision narrowed to that bead. He did not rush them. He didn't need speed. He needed precision. He shifted his weight, feinting left. The knife man's eyes followed. Jon's right hand snapped out and hurled a dagger. Took the knife man under the jaw. He gurgled, his grip loosening, and Catelyn tore herself free in the same moment, shoving hard with all the strength of a woman who had buried too many sons. Jon was on the other Frey before the man could react, sword cutting across the belly. The Frey folded, hands clutching at spilled heat. Catelyn staggered back, trembling, her hand to her throat. Blood smeared her fingers. She stared at Jon as if he were a story come alive. "There's no time," Jon said, his voice rougher than he wanted. "We have to get you out." Her eyes darted past him toward the hall. "Robb," she said, and her voice broke. "He's alive," Jon said. "I swear it." A sound echoed down the corridor. Boots, shouting, the clash of steel. More Freys. Jon grabbed Catelyn's wrist and pulled her into motion. They ran down the corridor toward a servant's stair, Jon's boots skidding on damp stone. Catelyn moved with desperate speed, skirts gathered in her hands. They burst into a lower passage that smelled of damp and old straw. The kitchen door stood ajar. A frightened scullion stared at them, mouth open. Jon didn't stop. He dragged Catelyn through and out into a back courtyard where rain fell hard and cold. Horses screamed Omwhere. Men shouted. Firelight flickered through windows. In the courtyard, Robb was there. He was bent over Talisa, his arms under her knees and shoulders, lifting her as if he could carry her away from death itself. Blood soaked her dress at the side, a dark stain spreading, but she was breathing, eyes clenched with pain. "Jon," Robb said, disbelief and fury tangled in the same word. "What?" "No questions," Jon snapped and hated himself for it. "Not now." Gray wind burst out of the hall behind them, jaws red, eyes wild. He skidded on wet stone, then bounded to Robb's side as if drawn by string. Robb flinched at the sight, then let out a ragged breath that was half laugh, half sob. "My wolf," he whispered, and gray wind pressed his head against Robb's leg, whining. A sound too soft for such a beast. Tormund appeared then, axe dripping, his grin gone sharp as a blade. Behind him wildlings poured out of a side door, hauling crossbows they'd stolen, dragging a wounded man between them. "We've taken the gallery," Tormund barked. "Their little nest of birds is smashed, but more are coming. This place is a rabbit warren, full of holes, full of rats." Robb's gaze flicked to the wounded man. It was Roose Bolton, his face broken and bleeding, his eyes cold as ever. Two wildlings held him by the arms like a trussed deer. "Bolton," Robb said, and his voice went very quiet. Roose smiled, blood on his teeth. "Your Grace," he murmured. "What a surprise." Catelyn stepped forward, fury shaking her whole body. "You?" she hissed. Her hand lifted as if she might tear his eyes out with her nails. Robb's mouth tightened, the boy and the king warring in his face. He looked at Jon again, and something in his eyes shifted. Gratitude, confusion, anger, all of it. The courtyard shook with distant impacts. Somewhere a door splintered. Frey men were spilling out, drawn by the noise like flies to meat. "We can't hold the castle," Jon said. Robb's jaw worked. "Then we take what we can," he said, and the king in him won. "We take our people and we leave the Freys to their shame." Tormund barked a laugh. "Shame won't kill them," he said. "But we can." Robb's eyes flashed. "Not now," he said, and the steel in his voice made even wildlings pause. "We live first." Jon nodded. He could feel the wall behind him like a shadow, but here, in this rain-soaked courtyard, the only wall that mattered was the one of bodies they would need to break through to escape. He lifted his sword. "Then we cut our way out," he said, and they did. They made it out beneath a sky that looked ashamed to be watching. The east was a smear of pale gray when the last of the Stark men staggered into the muddy field beyond the Frey camps. Rain had turned the ground into a sucking mire that tried to steal boots. Bodies lay where the fighting had spilled out. Frey men, river lords, a few Stark soldiers who would never go home. Smoke rose from tents set alight, thin and bitter. Behind them, the twins still stood, dark and solid. Jon looked back once and saw torches moving along the battlements like fireflies trapped behind stone. Horns sounded, angry and confused. The Freys had expected slaughter, not war. Robb stood with Talisa wrapped in a cloak, her face pale, her hand clenched tight around his. A healer, one of the River Lord's men, had bound her wound with strips torn from a tablecloth. She breathed shallowly, but she breathed. Catelyn hovered close, her eyes red-rimmed, her throat marked with a thin line of dried blood. Tormund sat on a stump like a king of his own kind, wiping his axe on the grass with casual contempt. Around him the wildlings ate stolen bread and laughed in harsh bursts, the kind of laughter that came after surviving something that should have killed you. Stark men watched them with faces like stone. Some looked as if they wanted to spit. Some looked as if they wanted to pray. Most looked simply tired. Jon stood a little apart, his shoulder throbbing where the bolt had torn through. Ghost sat beside him, ears pricked, eyes scanning. Grey wind prowled near Robb, bristling every time a wildling came too close. The two direwolves regarded each other with stiff caution, like brothers who had never met but recognized blood. Robb's gaze found Jon again, and he walked toward him, boots sinking into mud. For a moment Jon saw the boy Robb had been, laughing in the yard, throwing a spear too hard, boasting that he'd be the best swordsman in the north. Then Robb stopped a pace away and Jon saw only the king. "You shouldn't be here," Robb said. Jon's mouth went dry. "I know." Robb's eyes flicked to the black cloak, to the direwolf, to the wildlings behind. "You broke your vows." "Yes," Jon said, and the word felt like a blade cutting clean. He did not flinch from it. Catelyn came up behind Robb, her face tight. She looked at Jon as if she were seeing him for the first time, truly seeing. "You saved us," she said, and the words sounded like they hurt her to say. Jon bowed his head slightly. "I tried." Robb's jaw clenched. "Why?" he demanded. "Why now? Why with them?" Jon met his brother's eyes. "Because you were walking into death," he said, "and because no one else would come. The Watch would have chained me. The lords of the north are scattered. The river lords were drunk." Robb's gaze darted to Tormund, who raised a hand in a mocking salute. "And what did you promise them?" Robb asked, voice low. Jon didn't hesitate. "Land," he said, "south of the wall. The gift." Catelyn's fe. Allel like a fresh layer of snow. A northern lord, one of Robb's bannermen, face bruised and furious, stepped forward. "That land is ours," he snapped, "given to the Watch by kings long dead, not to be handed to savages who saved your king," Tormund called, loud enough for everyone. He grinned, but there was steel under it. "You're welcome." The bannerman's face went purple. He reached for his sword. Robb lifted a hand and the man stopped as if yanked by a leash. Robb's eyes stayed on Jon. "You promised," he said, "without asking me." Jon's throat tightened. "If you were dead," he said bluntly, "you couldn't be asked." Robb's gaze hardened. "You want to give them land," he said. "Fine, but not as raiders, not as guests, as bannermen, as sworn swords." The wildlings went still. Tormund's grin faded into something wary. Robb spoke into that stillness. "They settle in the gift," he said. "They farm, they build, they answer when called, as any in the north do. Any who raid, any who break peace, will be hunted like wolves." Tormund barked a laugh. "Hunted by wolves," he said, glancing at Ghost and Grey Wind. "Seems fair." Jon exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He had gambled with a king's fury and won. For now. Robb stepped closer. For a moment he wasn't the king. He was Robb again, and his voice dropped. "You saved my life," he said. Jon swallowed. "You're my brother." Robb's eyes softened, then hardened again. "And what are you now?" he asked. "A deserter? A Stark? A wolf in black?" Jon did not have an answer that fit. He only had the weight of what he'd done and what he still needed to do. "I'm the man who couldn't let you die," Jon said. Robb nodded once, as if he understood too well. Somewhere behind them, a Frey banner burned, the cloth curling and blackening in the rain. Smoke rose into the gray morning like a prayer that no god would answer. They did not have the luxury of mourning. Robb gathered what remained of his captains beneath a stolen awning. Canvas stretched between spears to make a poor roof against the rain. A map was thrown over a barrel. Mud smeared across it, corners weighted with knives. Catelyn stood at Robb's shoulder, her face pale and fierce, her fingers pressed tight against the table edge, as if she could hold the world steady by force. Jon listened, but his thoughts kept slipping north. The wall, the Watch, the cold beyond. It waited for him like unfinished business, like a debt. Robb tapped the map with a dagger. "We have two choices," he said. "We can try to take the twins, or we can leave and live." A Riverlord's voice spat anger. "Take it," the man snarled. "Hang every Frey from their walls." Tormund laughed softly. "That's the spirit," he said. Catelyn's eyes flashed. "It would feel good," she admitted, and the honesty of it cut deeper than any lie. "But it would cost us. Those towers are stone. We are wet and tired and broken." Robb's jaw tightened. "And Tywin Lannister will hear of this," he said. "If he hasn't already. The Freys will send ravens with their lies. They'll say we attacked first. They'll beg for help. The lions will come, and they will come fast." Jon watched a raven lift into the air beyond the awning, black wings beating against a sky like dirty wool. It vanished toward the south. Roose Bolton lay bound a few paces away, guarded by two wildlings who watched him as if he might sprout fangs. His broken nose had been set poorly. His face was swollen and purple, yet his eyes were calm, almost bored. Robb looked at him, and something in his expression grew colder than the rain. "You would have killed me," Robb said. Roose's smile was thin. "War is full of choices," he murmured. Catelyn stepped forward, rage shaking her. "You sat at our table," she hissed. "You ate our bread. You wore our cloak. You!" Roose's gaze slid to her throat, to the dried blood there, and for a heartbeat his calm cracked, not into pity but into calculation. "Guessed right," he said softly, as if the words were a tale he'd heard but never believed. Robb's hand clenched on the dagger. Jon could feel the hunger for vengeance in him, a hunger that would never be sated by anything less than blood. "Lord Bolton," Robb said, and his voice had the weight of judgment. "You will not see the Dreadfort again." Roose's eyes flickered. "Will you kill me?" he asked, almost curious. Robb stared at him a long moment. Then he shook his head once. "Not yet," he said. "Dead men are silent. I want your men to see you alive when they learn what you are. I want the North to know." Roose's mouth twitched, as if he found it amusing, or as if he found it dangerous. Robb turned back to the map. "We march north," he decided, voice cutting through any lingering debate. "We take what supplies we can. We leave the twins behind. We live." A murmur of reluctant agreement moved through tea. The captains. Some looked furious. Some looked relieved. All looked exhausted. Tormund scratched at his beard. "North," he said. "I've been marching south for years. Now I march north again. The world spins in circles." Jon met Robb's eyes. "If we go north," Jon said quietly, "we'll have to deal with more than Freys and lions." Robb's gaze sharpened. "What do you mean?" Jon hesitated. "How did you tell a king that the true war was one he could not see? How did you explain the smell of cold that wasn't weather, the silence of dead things moving under snow?" "I've seen what's beyond the wall," Jon said. "I've seen things that don't die the way men do." Tormund's grin faded. He looked away, suddenly less loud. One of the spearwives crossed herself in some wildling gesture, fingers brushing bone beads. Catelyn frowned. "Wild stories," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now, the kind that came after a night when the world had proven itself capable of any cruelty. Robb studied Jon. "Tell me," he ordered. Jon chose his words carefully. "There are dead men walking," he said. "Not tales, not nightmares, real. And they're coming." Silence fell beneath the awning, heavier than rain. A Frey horn sounded from the twins, distant and angry. Another answered. Shouts carried faintly across the mud. Robb exhaled slowly. When he spoke again, his voice was steady, but something in his eyes had shifted, as if a door had opened in his mind and cold air had rushed in. "Then we have no time to waste," Robb said. "We march north and we gather the North behind us. We will not be caught in another hall with our swords taken." He looked at Jon, and the king's mask slipped for a heartbeat. "Brother," he said very softly, "you should have been there all along." Jon's throat tightened. "I was trying to be," he said. Robb nodded. "Then be," he said simply. "Now." Outside the awning, the rain eased for a moment, and in that brief quiet Jon heard something else. Faint, far, a sound like ice shifting under pressure. He looked north without meaning to. Ghost lifted his head at the same moment, ears pricked, and gave a low, uneasy growl. They left the twins behind them like a bad dream that refused to fade. The column moved slow at first, men limping, horses tired, wagons patched together from whatever could be stolen or salvaged. The riverlands stretched around them in wet browns and grays, fields churned into mud by war and rain. Smoke rose from distant villages, thin as lies. Robb rode at the front, crown damp, cloak heavy. He did not look back. Jon rode beside him, his shoulder bound, his black cloak darker with wet. Ghost ran through slush with tireless grace, white fur spattered, eyes always scanning. Gray wind ranged farther, vanishing into brush and reappearing without sound. The direwolves' presence made men stand a little straighter. It made them remember fear and pride in equal measure. Behind them, Tormund's warband walked rather than rode, as if they refused to trust horses for long. They moved like a pack, loose and alert, eyes flicking to every ridge, every stand of trees. Northern soldiers watched them warily, hands never far from sword hilts. There were muttered curses. There were muttered prayers. There was no open violence, not with Robb's gaze like a blade across the whole column. Catelyn rode with her hood up, her face drawn. She did not speak much. When she looked at Jon now, it was with something new, something like reluctant respect, tangled with old resentment and the raw grief of what might have been. Jon could not blame her for any of it. Grief made monsters of good people. Fear made cowards of brave ones. He had seen both in the hall. Talisa rode in a covered cart, attended by healers. Robb checked on her whenever they stopped. His gentleness toward her a quiet defiance against the world that had tried to tear everything from him. At night, they made camps guarded hard. No more drinking until men fell senseless. No more trusting smiles. Watch shifts doubled. Robb's men sharpened their swords until the edges sang. On the second night, as sleet rattled against cloaks and men huddled close to the fire, Tormund sat across from Jon and gnawed on a strip of dried meat. "Your king's got iron in him," Tormund said. "I like that." "He had to," Jon said. Tormund's eyes glittered in firelight. "And you," he said, pointing with the meat. "You broke your crow vows for him. That's either the bravest thing I've seen or the stupidest." Jon stared into the flames. He saw the wall in them cold and towering. He saw Maester Aemon's blind eyes. He saw Sam's trembling hands. "It was necessary," Jon said. Tormund grunted. "That's what every man says right before he makes the world different." Jon didn't answer. His thoughts were north again, always north. He could feel it in the air even this far south, a thinness, a sharpness that didn't belong to weather, like the world was being scraped clean. Later, when the camp slept and only the watchers stood, Jon walked the edge of the firelight with Ghost at his side. The direwolf moved silent, his breath a pale plume. Jon lifted his face to the night. Clouds raced, stars flickered through gaps like cold eyes. Snow began to fall, light at first, then steadier, as if the north had decided to remind them who truly ruled. Robb approached quietly, boots crunching on frozen ground. He stood beside Jon, looking up. "It's coming early," Robb said. "Winter doesn't care about our wars," Jon replied. Robb was silent for a moment. Then, very softly, "I would have died," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact, spoken like a prayer that had no God to hear it. Jon's throat tightened. "Yes," he admitted. Robb's breath steamed. "And you saved me," he said. "With wildlings." "With people," Jon corrected. Robb's mouth twitched, almost a smile. He said. "With people." They stood together while snow dusted their cloaks. Two brothers, one a king, one an oathbreaker, both bound by blood and the weight of a world cracking under treachery. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, Beyond miles of forest and frozen river, the wall waited. Beyond the wall, deeper still, something older waited too. Patient as ice, hungry as night. Ghost growled low, a sound that vibrated in Jon's bones. Robb heard it. He looked at Jon, and in his eyes there was no doubt now, only grim acceptance. "When we reach the north," Robb said, "you'll tell me everything." Jon nodded once. "I will." The snow fell thicker, softening the edges of the world. The campfires burned low. The men slept with swords close, and in the dark beyond the trees, the night listened. The road hardened as it pulled away from the river, but the mud clung to them as if the twins had marked each man with its filth and meant to keep him. Sleety rain needled faces and turned breath to smoke. It slicked armor and made reins slippery in numb hands. Robb Stark did not slow. He rode as if the sound of the wedding hall still chased him, as if every beat of hooves was a strike of defiance against that song. Behind them, the Freys found their courage. At first it was only horns, distant and unsure, rising and falling like animals calling in fog. Then riders appeared on the long bend of the kingsroad, their horses dark against the pale sky, their banners snapping wetly. 2 blue towers, a black bridge. More joined them, spilling from side tracks and muddy lanes, a river of armed men pouring out from the castle's shadow. They were not marching to avenge their dead. They were chasing prey they had been promised would already be butchered. Robb's jaw tightened when he saw them. "How many?" he asked, voice clipped. "Enough to be annoying," Tormund Giantsbane said from where he stalked alongside the road, his boots sinking, his great shoulders hunched against the sleet. He sounded almost pleased. Jon narrowed his eyes. The Frey riders were spreading, trying to cut off the column's rear, to harry and panic, to turn retreat into rout. They had the confidence of men who believed they still owned the bridge at the Twins, the river behind them, the land around them. They were wrong on at least one count. Jon remembered the causeway in firelight, the frantic scramble, the moment when gray wind had hit the first line of Frey spearmen on the bridge and turned men into flailing shadows. He remembered Tormund laughing as he ripped a crossbow from a dying man and smashed another's teeth with its stock. They had taken the bridge long enough to pour their survivors across, then hacked at the winch ropes and jammed the portcullis with broken beams so it could not drop cleanly again. They had left the Twins with its own throat clogged. Still, a bridge only delayed. It did not stop vengeance from galloping. Robb turned in the saddle. "Harrion," he called, and a battered northern captain rode up, one of the men who had survived the haul by crawling under a table and coming up with his sword slick. His face was bruised, his eyes hollow, but his spine still held. "Your Grace, take 50, Robb said. "Hold the rear. No glory. Just keep them off our heels." Harrion's gaze flicked to the Frey riders, then to Robb. "I," he said, and there was no fear in it. Only the dead calm of a man who'd already seen what fear bought. He turned and barked orders, pulling men from the column. Northmen shuffled into a rough line, spears angled, bows strung with stiff fingers. Jon started to swing his horse, but Robb caught his wrist. "You're hurt," Robb said low. "I can still fight," Jon replied. Robb's grip tightened. "I don't doubt it, but I need you where you see and think." His eyes flicked toward the Wildlings, then toward the direwolves. "And where you can stop this from turning into something worse." Jon understood. A retreat that became a slaughter would not spare women, wounded, or the fragile agreement Robb had just hammered into being between Northerner and Free folk. One ugly spark could set the whole column against itself. The Frey riders came in with a shout, their horses' hooves throwing mud. Arrows rose from the Stark rear guard and fell 2-3 riders pitching from saddles. The Freys answered with bolts and screams, and steel met steel where the road narrowed between scrub and a shallow ditch. Tormund was already moving. He peeled away from the column with a handful of his warband, spearwives with grim mouths and raiders who carried axes like extensions of their arms. They did not form ranks. They flowed, slipping off the road into the wet brush, circling like wolves around a herd. A Frey rider leaned down with his sword raised, aiming for a northern boy whose spear had snapped. Grey wind hit the horse from the side with a snarl, teeth sinking into flank. The horse screamed and reared. The rider fell, and Ghost was on him in a blur of white, jaws closing on his forearm. The man's scream became a bubbling plea. Jon's stomach clenched. Direwolves did not kill clean the way a sword did. They killed the way winter killed, without mercy, without hesitation, without apology. "Hold!" Jon shouted, forcing his voice through the chaos. "Hold the line! Don't chase!" Some did not hear. Some did not care. Men who'd escaped a hall of murder wanted to hit back at anything wearing Frey colors. A few surged forward, hacking at fallen riders. Tormund's wildlings laughed and joined, and for a heartbeat the rearguard became less a line and more a frenzy. Robb's horse danced, sensing the blood. Robb lifted his voice, sharp as a horn. "Back!" he roared. "Back to the road! We do not scatter!" His authority cut through like a blade. Men hesitated, then stumbled back, dragging their rage with them. Harrion shoved a spear point into the mud and planted himself like a post. "Form!" he bellowed. "Form!" The Freys tried one more push. A rider with a blue cloak and a silvered helm barreled toward the gap, shouting something about the young wolf's head. Jon saw the man's eyes, bright with hate, but also with fear now, because direwolves were not part of any wedding plan Walder Frey had whispered. Tormund met him. The wildling did not swing at the man. He swung at the horse. His axe bit deep into the animal's shoulder. The horse collapsed in a screaming tangle. The rider hit the road hard enough to crack his helm on stone. Before he could move, Tormund planted a boot on his chest and leaned down. "Tell your old man in the towers," Tormund called, voice booming down the wet road, "that the wolves bite back." He took the man's helm off with a yank and smashed the rider's face into the mud until the shouting st. Up. Then, as if bored, Tormund waved his axe toward the Frey line. "Go on," he barked. "Run back to your bridge and your songs." The Freys did not run at once. They hovered, uncertain, as if waiting for a commander with enough spine to demand more blood. But the sight of Grey Wind prowling with red jaws, the white ghost of Ghost padding beside him, and the hard set of northern spears made something in them falter. They had expected drunk men trapped in a hall. They had found survivors with wolves and strangers who fought like storms. They broke, not into full flight, but into retreat, pulling back to regroup. Their horns sounded again, angry and confused. Robb did not pursue. He stared after them with a face made of stone, then turned his horse forward. "Move," he ordered the column. "Now." As they rode on, Jon's gaze slid to the cart where Talisa lay. He saw her pale hand grip the edge of the canvas as if she were anchoring herself to life. Robb kept looking straight ahead, but his knuckles were white on the reins. Catelyn rode close behind them, her eyes flicking to every tree lean, every bend. When she spoke, her voice was low enough that only Jon and Robb heard. "They'll send ravens," she said. "Walder Frey, the Lannisters, every man who wanted us dead will know we lived before the day is out." Robb's mouth tightened. "Let them know," he said. "Let them choke on it." Jon looked north. The sleet fell harder, turning to snow in the air. The north was calling them home with a cold, patient voice. And behind them, the Freys were learning that a broken law did not end with one night. It began there. By nightfall, the wind had teeth again. They found shelter where there should have been people. A cluster of low stone outbuildings around a collapsed barn, the remains of some roadside holdfast that war had emptied. The yard was a bog of trampled snow and dung. Roof beams stuck up like broken ribs. Someone had painted 7-pointed stars on a wall once. Now the paint was peeling, the holy symbol flaking away under the damp as if the gods themselves had abandoned the place. Robb ordered the camp set anyway. There were only so many places a wounded army could hide, and no place that did not carry the stink of fear. Men lit fires under broken lean-tos, keeping flames low. Horses were tied inside the barn skeleton, their flanks steaming. The wounded were laid on straw and cloaks. Talisa was brought into the least ruined building, the one that still had half a roof and a door that could be shut, and Robb went with her, refusing to leave until a healer had looked at the ragged wound in her side and swore she would not bleed out in the night. Outside, the camp's fragile truce creaked. Tormund Giantsbane took one look at the crumbling sept wall and laughed. "Your Southron gods can't keep their own house standing," he said, loud enough for anyone to hear. A northern man, older, with a long gray beard and eyes like flint, spat into the snow. "Watch your mouth," he growled. Tormund turned, grin sharp. "Make me." Hands went to hilts. Wildling spearwives shifted, their spears angling instinctively toward threat. Northern men tightened ranks without thinking, bodies remembering old enemies beyond the wall, old raids, old stories of stolen children and slit throats. Jon stepped between them before steel could sing. "Not," he said, voice firm. "Here, not now." The gray-bearded man's gaze burned into Jon. "This is your doing," he said, as if Jon had personally invited every wildling across the wall to piss on their graves. "We're bedding down with animals because you wanted to play hero." Tormund's smile vanished like a snuffed flame. "We're people," he said again, quieter than before. It landed differently in the cold. It sounded less like argument and more like a stubborn fact hammered by a lifetime of being called less than human. The northern man snorted. "People don't." "Enough!" Robb's voice cut from behind them. Jon turned. Robb had emerged from Talisa's shelter, his cloak thrown over his shoulders, his crown left off for the night. Without it he looked younger, but the hardness in his eyes made up for the missing metal. He walked into the circle of firelight and stared at both groups until even Tormund held his tongue. "We do not kill each other," Robb said, each word placed like a stone in a wall. "Not after what we escaped, not while we still have enemies at our backs and ahead. If any man here, Northman or free folk, draws steel on an ally, I will have his hand cut off." A murmur ran through the northern men, through the wildlings too. They did not like kings threatening punishment any more than they liked crows. Yet something in Robb's tone, something earned in blood, held. Tormund scratched at his beard. "You cut my hand off, I'll still fight with the other," he said, but his voice had softened, half jest, half warning. Robb met it without flinching. "Then don't make me," he replied. Catelyn stood at the edge of the firelight, arms wrapped around herself. The marks on her throat showed dark against pale skin. When her gaze met Jon's, it did not soften. It did not harden either. It held him like an old wound holds cold. Later, when the camp settled into uneasy quiet and men took watch positions in pairs, Robb gathered his captains around a rough map spread over a slab of stone. Jon stood close, shoulder aching, feeling every shift of his bandage. "We can't go east," one captain said, tapping a muddy finger toward the trident's branches. "Too many crossings. Frey men will harry us. Lannister outriders too." "We can't go west," another countered. "Too close to Harrenhal and the Lion's Reach." Robb listened, jaw clenched. "We go north," he said at last, as if there had never been any question. "Straight up the kingsroad to the neck." The words drew immediate replies, grim, uneasy. "The neck is a choke," a man muttered. "Moat Cailin." "Aye," Robb said. "Moat Cailin." Even speaking the name seemed to pull damp air into the circle. The ruined fortress was ancient and half-fallen, but it sat where every path into the north narrowed. A handful of men could hold it against an army if they had sense and stones enough to throw. In their world, Moat Cailin was the north's throat. "And it's held by Ironborn," Catelyn said, voice tight. "Balon Greyjoy's men." Robb's mouth twisted. "Aye," he said. "Another debt." Jon watched the firelight flicker across the map. The neck, swamps, causeways. He remembered stories from Winterfell. Howland Reed, the Crannogmen, men who could vanish into reeds and kill you with a blowpipe you never saw. He also remembered the Ironborn. Fierce, stubborn, and proud enough to die rather than yield. Tormund leaned over the map uninvited, his finger leaving a wet smear. Swamps, he said with distaste. I hate swamps. They smell like dead fish and old piss. Jon almost smiled. You hate anything that isn't a mountain, he said. Tormund agreed readily. Mountains are honest. Swamps lie. Robb's eyes flicked to Jon. Can we take it? He asked, and beneath the king's voice there was the brothers, asking not just for strategy, but for faith. Jon breathed out. Not by storming the front, he said. Not with what we have left. Robb's gaze hardened. Then we find another way. Catelyn's fingers tightened on the edge of the stone. Edmure, she said suddenly, voice breaking. We left him. The camp quieted. Even Tormund stopped scratching. Robb's eyes closed for a heartbeat. When he opened them again, pain lived there, controlled and fierce. I know. He said. They had not found Edmure Tully in the chaos. He had been somewhere inside the twins, perhaps in a bedding chamber, perhaps dragged off at sword point like Catelyn had been. Ravens would carry the truth soon enough. The Freys had a hostage with Tully blood, and hostages were knives held to a family's throat. We'll come back for him, Robb said, but it sounded less like a promise and more like a vow he was forcing into existence. Catelyn nodded once, as if she had no choice but to accept it, then turned away before anyone could see her face crumble. Jon watched her go and felt something twist inside him. He had never been her son, not truly, but he had been under her roof. He had learned early what it meant to live close to love and not be allowed to touch it. When Robb dismissed the council, Jon stepped outside into the cold and found Ghost at the edge of the broken yard. The direwolf's eyes were on the darkness beyond the firelight. What do you smell? Jon murmured. Ghost did not answer, of course. He only stared, tense, as if waiting for something to step out of the night. In the distance, far behind them, a horn sounded faintly, an echo from the twins, or perhaps just the wind playing tricks. Jon held his breath anyway. The next day brought a thinner sky and a harder cold, as if the world had decided sleet was too merciful and snow too gentle and settled on something in between. They broke camp before dawn, not because they were rested, but because staying still felt like begging to be found. By midday, the column had stretched into a long, weary line up the kingsroad. Wagons rattling, horses plodding, men trudging with their shoulders hunched. The trees thickened. The land rose and fell in low, sullen waves. Crows watched from bare branches, fat and unafraid. Jon rode near the middle now, close enough to the wagons to keep an eye on Talisa's shelter, close enough to hear the muttered complaints of men who were running out of rage and finding only hunger beneath it. Robb stayed at the front. Catelyn rode not far behind him, her face hidden beneath her hood, her presence like a blade in its sheath. Ghost ran beside Jon's horse, white fur stark against gray slush. Every so often he would pause, nose lifting, then lope on again. Gray wind ranged farther, vanishing into brush and reappearing ahead as if the woods were his true road. It was Ghost who signaled first. He stopped abruptly, ears forward, body going taut. Jon's horse snorted, feeling the change. Jon leaned down, one hand on the pommel of his sword, and followed Ghost's gaze. Between the trees, up ahead and off the road, movement. Not a deer, not a wolf. A small figure, crouched low, half hidden by a fallen log. A second, larger shadow behind it, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a cloak, with the stillness of a man who had learned to wait for violence the way others waited for dawn. Jon's heart stumbled. He swung down from his horse without thinking and stepped off the road, boots sinking. Hold, he called back, and a few men looked up, alert at once. The small figure shifted. A flash of steel caught the weak light, thin and straight. Needle. Jon's breath caught so hard it hurt his wounded shoulder. Arya? He said, not loud, as if speaking the name too strongly might scatter her like a startled bird. The figure froze. For half a heartbeat, it did not move at all. Then it surged forward out of hiding like a shot. Arya! Jon shouted, and the word ripped out of him raw. She ran hard, slipping in slush, boots too big, face smeared with mud and tears and something feral. She looked thinner than he remembered, like hunger had chewed her down to bone and stubbornness. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes were huge. Behind her, the larger shadow lunged. A man's arm reaching, a gloved hand catching her shoulder. "No," the man snarled, voice rough as gravel. "Stay!" Arya wrenched free with the fury of a trapped animal and sprinted straight at Jon, needle still clutched in her fist like a talisman. Jon caught her as she hit him, nearly knocked off balance by the force of her. She slammed into his chest, fists pounding at his black cloak, and then her arms locked around him so tight he could scarcely breathe. "You're alive," she sobbed, the words muffled against him. "You're alive. I thought. Jon's throat closed. He held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, fingers tangling in her messy hair. He could feel how light she was, how sharp her shoulder blades had become under her ragged cloak. "I'm here," he managed. "I'm here." Arya pulled back just enough to look at him, eyes shining. "Robb," she gasped. "Robb, I saw banners, I saw." "Robb lives," Jon said, and watched the relief slam into her like a wave. Her face twisted as if she could not hold all the feeling inside her skin. A sound came from the road, hoofbeats, shouts of surprise. Men were turning, staring, voices rising. Catelyn Stark's horse pushed through the line, and then Catelyn was there, dismounting with hands that shook. She stepped closer like a woman walking toward a cliff edge, terrified of what she might see over it. Arya turned. For a heartbeat, mother and daughter stared at each other as if neither quite trusted the world enough to believe. Then Catelyn made a sound that was half sob, half prayer, and she ran. She gathered Arya into her arms with a fierceness that looked almost like anger, as if she could crush the girl back into safety by force. Arya clung to her, face pressed into her mother's cloak, shoulders shaking. "My baby," Catelyn whispered, voice breaking. "My sweet girl." Jon stood a step away, watching, feeling like an intruder on something holy. He remembered Catelyn's coldness, the way her eyes had slid past him at Winterfell as if he were smoke. Yet now, seeing her hold Arya as if she would never let go, Jon felt a pang that was not resentment but understanding. Love was a wound too, one you chose to keep open. A harsh laugh cut through the moment. Sandor Clegane stepped out of the trees like a threat made flesh. He was bigger than Jon remembered, though perhaps Jon's memory had always underestimated how much space a man like the Hound could take. His hood was up, but the lower half of his face showed, stubble jaw, cracked lips, the edge of burn scar. His eyes were flat and watchful. "Well," Sandor said, "a happy reunion." Men shifted on the road. Steel whispered from scabbards. A few Stark soldiers lifted spears, uncertain whether they were seeing an enemy or a miracle. Arya jerked away from her mother's arms and spun, fury blazing through tears. "He brought me," she snapped, as if daring anyone to say otherwise. "He didn't kill me. He could have." Catelyn's hands tightened on Arya's shoulders, her gaze fixed on Sandor with a hatred that looked old and deep. "The Hound," she said, and the name dripped poison. "A Lannister dog." Sandor's mouth twisted. "Not anymore," he said. Robb's voice came from behind them, sharp. "Arya." Jon turned and saw Robb riding up, disbelief and hope battling on his face. He swung down from his horse and stared at Arya as if she were a dream he'd been afraid to wake from. Arya broke free again and ran into Robb, nearly toppling him the way she had Jon. Robb caught her and laughed, one ragged sound that cracked into something like a sob. He held her tight, forehead pressed to her hair. "Arya," he whispered. "Gods, gods." Gray wind appeared between tents, silent. He padded forward, sniffed at Arya, and then licked her cheek once, as if confirming she was real. Arya made a startled noise through her tears and hugged his neck without thinking, fingers digging into thick fur. Ghost sat near Jon's knee, watching Sandor with pale, unblinking eyes. Sandor Clegane looked at the direwolf and, for the first time, A flicker of something like uncertainty crossed his face. Even the hound understood teeth. The moment, fragile as frost, held. Then Robb straightened, still holding Arya by the shoulders, and his gaze swung to Sandor like a blade finding its target. "Who are you to bring my sister to me?" Robb demanded. Sandor's smile was humorless. "The man who kept her alive," he said, and the camp's happiness tightened into a new kind of tension, because in the north even miracles came with knives attached. The camp had been starving for certainty. A reunion fed it for a heartbeat. Then the old hunger for enemies returned, sharper for having been briefly soothed. Robb and Sandor stared at each other across a few feet of trampled snow. Around them men gathered, forming a loose ring, spears angled, bows half raised. Wildlings watched too from the edge, curious and ready, as if this were simply another kind of entertainment at a feast. Arya stood between the two men like a small, furious wall, her shoulders squared, needle held out with all the seriousness of someone who had killed before and could do it again. "Move," Robb said to her, voice tight. "No," Arya snapped, without looking back. "He's not yours to kill." Robb's jaw clenched. "He served Joffrey," he said, each word bitten off. "He served the man who took father's head. He is a Lannister's dog." Sandor's lips peeled back in something that was not quite a smile. "And you're a boy wearing a crown," he said. "We're both full of surprises." A northern soldier stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "He took the little wolf," the man said, voice shaking with anger. "We should hang him." Sandor's gaze flicked to the man. "Try," he said simply. The word was not a challenge. It was an invitation to die. Jon felt the moment teeter. He could almost see it. One spear thrust, one wildling laugh, one northern man spitting at the wrong time, and the camp would turn into another hall. Another place where family bled because pride demanded it. He stepped in. "Enough," Jon said, voice firm. Robb's eyes flashed toward him. "He kidnapped her," Robb growled. "He didn't," Arya said fiercely. She hesitated, jaw working, because the truth was uglier than her anger wanted it to be. "He took me, but he kept me from worse." Catelyn's hands were clenched at her sides, her knuckles pale. "Worse than the hound?" she said, voice trembling with fury. Arya's eyes flicked to her mother, and for a heartbeat Jon saw the child she had been. Then it hardened into something older. "Worse," Arya said quietly. "Much worse." The ring of men shifted. A few looked away. They had all heard stories, what men did to girls on roads when no lord watched. Robb's gaze stayed on Sandor. "Why bring her now?" he demanded. "Why not sell her to Frey or Lannister or whoever would pay you more?" Sandor snorted. "Because the Freys were supposed to kill you," he said bluntly. "That was the whole point. Dead king, dead ransom. I'm not that stupid." The words landed like stones. A murmur rolled through the gathered men. Half anger, half cold realization. Even in this camp, some had been clinging to the hope that the massacre had been a Frey whim, not a plan stitched with lion gold. Hearing it spoken so plainly sharpened the hatred into something cleaner. Robb's sword half slid from its sheath with a rasp. Arya shoved needle up higher, trembling with determination. "Robb," she warned. Robb's eyes flicked to her, just a flicker and into. At heartbeat Jon saw the brother in him, the way he could not bear to hurt her even when she defied him. "Put it away," Jon said to Robb low. Not an order, an appeal. Robb's nostrils flared. His hand tightened on the hilt, then eased, just slightly. Sandor watched, amused. "Look at that," he said. "Two brothers telling a king what to do." Robb's eyes snapped back, icy. "You're in no place to speak," he said. Sandor shrugged. "I'm in a place where I'm alive," he replied. Catelyn stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You think that excuses you?" she hissed. "For what you've done, for what you are." Sandor's gaze met hers, and something dark passed through it. "I'm a man who didn't rape your daughter," he said, voice flat. "You want to hate someone? Hate the ones who would." Catelyn's face went rigid, as if the words had slapped her. Arya's shoulders shook with contained rage and grief. Jon saw Robb's hand tighten again, saw Grey Wind lift his head, lips curling. A direwolf did not understand politics. It understood threat. Jon moved closer to Sandor, just enough to be heard. "If you came for coin," Jon said, "say it plainly. If you came for something else, say that too." Sandor's eyes slid to Jon's black cloak. "You," he said, as if tasting the sight. "Night's Watch. Thought you lot didn't meddle in wars." Jon did not blink. "I'm here," he said. "That's what matters." Sandor looked around at the spears, the wolves, the king. Then he barked a short, humorless laugh. "Fine," he said. "I came for coin." Arya made a sound of betrayal. "Liar," she hissed. Sandor's mouth tightened. "If I say I grew a conscience, will you all kneel and clap?" He snapped, then softened, only a fraction. "I kept the girl alive because she's too stubborn to die, and because I've seen what happens to children in wars." His eyes flicked away, as if the memory tasted like ash. Robb stared at him. "What do you want?" he asked. Sandor's gaze returned. "Sharp. Gold," he said, and when Robb's expression hardened, Sandor added, "Or safe passage, or a horse, something. I'm not walking away empty-handed because you found your sister." Robb's mouth twisted. He reached into his belt pouch, pulled out a small heavy sack, and tossed it. It landed in the snow with a dull thud. Sandor crouched, picked it up, weighed it in his hand. Coins clinked. His eyes narrowed. "Not enough," he said. Robb's voice went cold. "It's what you get," he replied. "Be grateful I don't give you steel." Sandor's gaze slid to Arya. For a heartbeat, something like conflict flickered. Then it vanished under his usual contempt. "Keep your little sword," he said to Arya, nodding at Needle. "You'll need it. Your family won't always be there to catch you." Arya's chin lifted. "I don't need you," she said, but her voice wavered. Sandor stood, turned his back on the ring of spears as if daring anyone to strike. He started to walk away. Robb's voice stopped him. "If you ever raise a hand against her again," Robb said, quiet as a threat in the dark, "I will hunt you to the ends of the world." Sandor paused. He did not turn. "Good," he said. "At least you'd be good at something." Then he kept walking, disappearing toward the trees. Arya watched him go, fists clenched, face twisted with too many feelings to name. Catelyn pulled her close again, not gentle but desperate, as if afraid the world might steal her the moment she let go. Robb looked at Jon, and in his eyes Jon saw the same truth he felt. The war had changed them all. Even reunions came with bitterness. Even mercy tasted like iron. "Get her warm," Robb said finally, voice rough. And then, a horn sounded from the rear of the column. A warning. Men shouted. Robb's head snapped up. They were not alone on the road. Not yet. At Castle Black, the wind never stopped reminding men what they were. It howled around the timber and stone like a hungry thing, finding every crack, tugging at every shutter, making the torches in the common hall flicker and spit. Men of the Night's Watch hunched over bowls of thin stew and hard bread, their faces drawn, their hands scarred. Beyond the wall, the night waited. Beneath the wall, the politics of the South reached up like hands through ice. Samwell Tarly sat with his shoulders rounded, as if trying to make himself small enough to disappear. It did not work. Alliser Thorne's glare had the precision of an arrow. "So," Thorne said, voice sharp, "we have a missing man."
Some swallowed.
He began, and his voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Jon Snow is not missing," he said more firmly. "He left." A low murmur ran through the hall. Some faces tightened with suspicion. Some softened with understanding. Most hardened with the reflex of law. Bowen Marsh shifted beside the table, ledger clutched like a shield. "Left?" he repeated, as if the word itself were obscene. "Without leave, without order, without honor," Thorne snapped. slamming his fist on the table. The cups jumped. Desertion. Sam flinched, but Maester Aemon did not. The old maester sat with his hands folded. His blind eyes turned toward the sound as if he could see the anger in it. "Words are stones," Aemon murmured. "Be careful which ones you throw." Thorne's lip curled. "Spare me your riddles, old man," he said. A crow flew the coop. "If we let that stand, we might as well open the gates and invite the free folk in for supper." A few brothers chuckled darkly. No one laughed long.
Same's cheeks burned.
"Jon Snow saved the watch," he blurted. "He warned us about Mance Raider. He killed Corran Halfhand because he was told to. And now he's gone," Thorne cut in. "When we need every sword." Outside, the wind keened. A raven screamed from its cage, as if offended by being reminded of duty. Bowen Marsh cleared his throat. "We cannot ignore desertion," he said, voice tight. "The law is clear. The penalty is death." Sam felt the room tilt. He stared at the table's rough grain as if it could tell him how to keep a man alive with words. Maester Aemon lifted his chin slightly. "The law is clear," he agreed, "and yet the world beyond our law is not." Thorne snorted. "The world beyond our law can freeze," he said. "We do not bend because a bastard wants to play at being a Stark." Sam's hands clenched. He saw Jon's face in his mind, set, determined, sorrowful. He remembered the raven message, the red wax, the words that had made Jon's eyes go far away. He remembered Jon's hand on his shoulder in the tunnel, steady and warm. "He didn't leave for glory," Sam said, voice shaking. "He left because his brother was going to die." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "And that is our concern?" Sam looked up, and something fierce rose in him, surprising in its H. It should be," he said. "If the North falls apart, who will hold the wall? Who will send us men? Food? Steel? We are not separate from the realm, no matter how much we pretend." The hall went quieter. A few men shifted uncomfortably. The watch liked to think itself above kings and crowns, but it ate what kings sent. Bowen Marsh's mouth tightened. "We are not here to judge the realm," he said. "We are here to hold the wall." "And Jon Snow left that wall," Thorne snapped, triumphant, as if the argument ended there. Aemon's thin fingers tapped the table. "A raven came today," he said softly. Thorne's attention snapped toward the maester despite himself. "From where?" "From the twins," Aemon replied. The hall stirred. Even men who pretended not to care about southern wars leaned in at the name. The twins meant crossing, meant trade, meant the Riverland's thin thread. Clyda stepped forward with the scroll, its wax seal still glossy. "Not black, blue, a Frey seal." Thorne took it with a sneer and broke it. He read quickly, then slower, his expression shifting from contempt to surprise to something like irritation. "Well?" Bowen Marsh demanded. Thorne's mouth twisted. "Lord Walder Frey," he read aloud, voice clipped, "requests the Night's Watch close its gates to wildlings and deserters. He claims a group of free folk have crossed south with Jon Snow, and that Robb Stark." He paused, as if the words did not make sense in his mouth. "That Robb Stark yet lives?" Thorne finished, and the hall erupted into murmurs. Sam's heart slammed. "Robb lives. Jon did it." Thorne's eyes flashed. "Lies," he barked, as if saying it could make it so. Aemon's blind face remained calm. "A Frey has no reason to lie about a wolf living," he said. "Not if he meant to kill him." Thorne's jaw worked. He crumpled the parchment in his fist. "Whether Stark lives or not," he snarled, "Jon Snow is still a deserter, and wildlings south of the wall are still an enemy force." Sam's voice rose despite himself. "They saved Robb Stark," he said, and the words made the room freeze. "Jon Snow went to stop a massacre. If he hadn't..." Thorne's eyes narrowed, and for a heartbeat Sam thought he might be struck. Then Bowen Marsh spoke, more cautious than Thorne, but no less cold. "If wildlings are south," Marsh said, And Freys are calling it an invasion. The lords will demand we act. They will demand heads. Jon Snow's head. Sam's stomach dropped. He looked to Aemon as if the old man could conjure a miracle out of blindness. Aemon's lips moved in a whisper too soft for most to hear. Sam caught a few words anyway. Love is the death of duty. Then Aemon spoke louder. Send a raven, he said. Thorne's gaze snapped. To whom? Aemon's blind eyes turned toward Sam as if he could see him. To Robb Stark, Aemon said. To the king in the north. Ask him what Jon Snow has done and why. Ask him what threat rides with the free folk and what bargain has been made.
Tornela.
Ugged bitterly. We ask a boy king in rebellion for counsel? Aemon's voice remained gentle. We ask the north, he corrected. Because winter does not care whose banner flies. And because if the wall is to stand, the north must stand with it. The hall held its breath. Even Thorne could not deny the truth in that. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere beyond the ice, a horn sounded faintly in the dark. So distant it might have been imagined, but cold enough to make every man's spine tighten. Sam stared at the raven cage, at black wings and bright eyes. He prayed Jon Snow was moving fast. In King's Landing, the air was damp with rot and perfume. The Red Keep perched above the city like a crown set on filth, its walls warm in the southern sun, its corridors smelling of polished stone and sweat. Even in winter, the capital did not understand cold the way the north did. It understood only hunger, the hungry of streets below, the hungry of courtiers above. Tywin Lannister's solar was a chamber of order amid the city's stink. Papers lay stacked with ruthless neatness. A map of the realm sprawled across a table, held flat by carved lions. The fire in the hearth was steady, expensive, controlled. Tywin himself stood like a pillar, his gray-green eyes fixed on the parchment in his hand as if he could burn it into obedience. The seal had been broken and crushed. Blue wax smeared his fingers like a bruise. Cersei Lannister lounged near the hearth, but her gaze was sharp, restless. Joffrey Baratheon sprawled on a chair as if it belonged to him by divine right. Tyrion Lannister sat on the edge of another, cup untouched, eyes watchful. Varys hovered in a corner, silk-soft and silent, his smile absent for once. Tywin read the message again, then again. Finally he spoke, voice quiet and lethal. Walder Frey has failed. Joffrey's face twisted. Failed? He snapped. How do you fail to kill a wolf in a cage? I was told it was done. I was told. You were told what was convenient, Tywin said, without looking at him. Joffrey's cheeks colored. They should have cut his head off and sent it to me. He snarled, petulant and cruel. You wanted a story, Tywin said. A toy. This is not a game, your grace. This is war. Joffrey swallowed whatever retort he'd been about to fling. He was king, but he was also a boy, and Tywin's disapproval could still sting like a lash. Cersei's fingers tightened around her wine cup. How is this possible? She demanded. Roose Bolton was. Tywin's mouth twitched. Roose Bolton is either incompetent, unlucky, or dead, he said. Walder's letter suggests Bolton was prevented from finishing his task. Tyrion leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Prevented by whom? Tywin's eyes hardened. Jon Snow, he said, and the name sounded strange in this southern chamber, like a cold wind that didn't belong. And a band of free folk. Silence snapped taut. Cersei's lip curled. Wildlings, she spat as if it were filth. How did? Varys's voice slid in, soft. The Night's Watch has been strained, he said. There are reports of unrest at the wall. If one man chose to slip through and bring some of the free folk with him, Tywin's gaze did not shift. Then the wall is less of a wall than we assumed, he said. Tyrion's mouth tightened. He thought of Sansa upstairs, a frightened bird in a gilded cage, a Stark in Lannister hands. He thought of how he tried, awkwardly, to be kind, and how kindness in this place was simply another kind of weakness. If Robb Stark lives, Tyrion said carefully, then the North. is not broken, the river lords might rally again. Tywin set the Frey letter on the table with deliberate calm. The river lords are broken, he said. Their will is not. There is a difference. Joffrey leaned forward, eyes bright with spite. Then kill him, he demanded.
Send men.
Burn the north. I want his head. Tywin looked at him as one might look at an ill-trained dog. If it were as simple as sending men, we would not be sitting here, he said. Armies do not march through swamps and ruin quickly. Winter slows steel as surely as it slows hunger. Cersei's voice sharpened. What of the Freys? She asked. If Walder failed, he will beg for help. He will want reward still. He will get survival, Tywin said. If he is wise, he will hold Edmure Tully tight and keep the bridge closed. If he is foolish, he will attempt to chase the wolves and lose more sons. Tyrion's eyes flicked up. Edmure, he said. So the Freys still have a hostage. Tywin nodded. And we have leverage. Joffrey scowled. Use Sansa, he suggested, eager. Send her head north. That will. Tyrion's hand tightened around his cup until his knuckles went white. No, he said, too fast. Tywin's gaze slid to him, assessing. No, he repeated. Tyrion forced his voice steady. Sansa Stark is useful alive, he said. She is a claim, a key, promise, a threat. Dead. She is only a message. Tywin considered that, then nodded once, as if Tyrion had managed not to be useless for a breath. Alive, he agreed. For now. Cersei's eyes narrowed. And what of Bolton? She pressed. Roose was meant to be our blade in the north. Tywin's mouth set. If Bolton is captured, he said, then his bastard at the Dreadfort will be unpredictable. Varys's smile returned. Faint. Ramsay Snow is not known for restraint. Tywin's voice stayed calm. Restraint is not what I require. I require results. He turned back to the map and placed his finger on the neck. Moat Cailin, he said. Tyrion followed his gaze. The Ironborn hold it, he said. Yes, Tywin replied. And the Ironborn have no love for Stark. They will keep the North's throat closed if it pleases them, and if it profits them. Send word to the Ironborn commander at Moat Cailin. Gold, promises, whatever buys time. Cersei's brows rose. You would bargain with rebels and raiders? I would bargain with the stranger if it won me a day, Tywin said. Write it. Joffrey made a noise of disgust. Cowardice, he muttered. Tywin's gaze cut to him. Statecraft, he corrected. You will learn the difference, or you will be consumed by it. Joffrey slumped back, sulking. Tywin's eyes returned to the Frey letter. Walder will also send ravens, he said, to every lord who hates Stark. He will claim the Starks attacked his house at a wedding. He will drape himself in victimhood and beg for protection. Cersei's mouth curled. And the small folk will believe whatever song is loudest. Tywin nodded. Songs, he said, almost to himself. Always songs. Tyrion stared at the map, at the long roads and choke points and rivers. He imagined Robb Stark alive, furious, moving north with whatever shattered army remained. He imagined the north standing again, teeth bared. He imagined a war that refused to end, and winter closing over it like a lid. What if they reach the north? Tyrion asked quietly. What if Robb rallies his bannermen? What if? Tywin's expression did not change. Then we kill him there, he said. Varys folded his hands. And Jon Snow? He asked, mild as ever. Tywin's gaze was cold. One bastard does not change the realm, he said. But he may complicate the wall. Keep eyes on the watch. If Jon Snow has brought wildlings south, the lords will howl. Let them. Chaos is useful. Tyrion felt a chill despite the southern warmth. Tywin did not fear chaos. He used it like a tool. Tywin reached for a fresh parchment. Send ravens, he ordered. To Walder Frey, to the Ironborn, to the Dreadfort, and to Jaime. Cersei's eyes flashed. Jaime is on his way back, she said. Then he will turn around, Tywin replied. If my son wishes to prove he is still useful with one hand, he can do it by ending the young wolf. Tyrion's throat tightened. He thought of Jaime, proud and stubborn, now maimed and furious. He thought of the Riverlands soaked in blood. He thought of Sansa upstairs, and of the North, and of a bastard in black riding through snow with wildlings at his back. The realm was cracking in places no one could see yet. Tywin dipped his quill. Robb Stark lived, he said softly, as if tasting the insult. Very well, then we will kill him twice. The neck did not announce itself with walls or banners. It swallowed you. The land flattened, then softened, then turned into something that felt less like earth and more like a living thing that resented being stepped on. Trees grew crooked. Their roots knotted in black water. Mist clung to everything, cloak, hair, eyelashes, so that men looked like ghosts of themselves. The road narrowed into a raised causeway of old stone and packed mud that disappeared into fog ahead and behind, and on either side the swamp waited, deep and quiet. Horses hated it. They rolled their eyes, nostrils flaring, hooves slipping on slick stone. Men hated it too, though they pretended otherwise. The neck stank of rot and stagnant water and things that had died and never quite finished dying. Tormund made a face. I told you, he muttered. Swamps lie. Jon kept his eyes moving. The mist made everything close and far at once. A tree branch could be a spear. A ripple in water could be a man. Ghost padded beside him, for damp, body tense. Gray wind ranged ahead, vanishing into fog, his shape a pale smear one moment and nothing the next. This is Crannogman land, Jon said softly, more to himself than to Tormund. Tormund snorted. Little men in little boats, he said. My father told stories, said they could breathe mud and shoot poison from reeds. Some stories are true, Jon replied. They heard the first sound like a whisper in grass. Jon stopped. Ghost froze. The direwolf's ears angled forward, his breath barely visible. A shape moved in the reeds to their left. Then another, so quiet Jon might have imagined them if Ghost had not shown the same focus. A spear point emerged, dark and wet. A small man stepped onto the causeway with the grace of someone who had never slipped here in his life. He wore a cloak mottled green and brown that blended with the swamp. His face was narrow, his eyes dark, his hair damp against his brow. Behind him more men appeared, slipping out of mist as if the swamp had exhaled them. Crannogmen. Tormund's hand dropped toward his axe. Well, he murmured, almost delighted. Here's a lie walking on two legs. Jon lifted his empty hands. We're friends, he called, voice steady. The Crannogman's eyes flicked to Jon's black cloak, then to the direwolf. His gaze sharpened. Stark, he said, the word soft, like a name spoken with respect in a place where respect was rare. Robb rode up through the column, cloak pulled tight, eyes narrowed. Men behind him bristled, spears angling, uncertain whether this was ambush or ally. Catelyn came too, her horse stepping nervously on the slick stone. When she saw the Crannogmen, something in her expression shifted, relief edged with wariness. House Reed, she said, voice low. The Crannogman inclined his head. My lord sends word, he said, and his accent was thick with swamp. The vowels rounded strangely. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small carved token, which shaped into the head of a lizard lion, crude but unmistakable. Catelyn's breath caught. Howland, she whispered, and for a heartbeat Jon saw something like hope flicker in her eyes. Howland Reed had been Ned Stark's closest friend. If any man in the North might still have loyalty untainted by ambition, it was Howland. Robb slid down from his horse, boots squelching. What word? He demanded. The Crannogman held out the token. My lord says the swamp sees, he replied. He says the wolves must come home, and the reeds will open a path. He says, the neck will bite any who chase you. Robb's eyes narrowed, suspicion and gratitude warring. A path, he echoed. To Moat Cailin? The crannogman nodded once. "The Ironborn hold the stones," he said. "But stones can be starved. Men can be lost. The swamp is patient." Tormund laughed softly. "I like him," he said. "He talks like a threat." The crannogman's gaze slid to Tormund and lingered on his height. His beard, his wildling furs. He did not flinch. "And you bring strangers," he said to Jon, not accusing, simply observing. Jon met his eyes. "We needed them," he said. The crannogman's gaze flicked to Ghost, then to Grey Wind as the larger direwolf reappeared out of the mist, eyes bright. The crannogman's face did not show fear, but his posture shifted, respectful as if the wolves were not animals but omens. "Dire wolves," he murmured. "The old gods walk with you." Catelyn's mouth tightened at that, grief and memory twisting together. "The old gods watched my husband die," she said quietly. The crannogman did not look away. "The old gods watch," he said simply. "They do not always stop." Robb's hand clenched. "Tell Howland Reed I will remember this," he said, voice rough. "Tell him the North will remember." The crannogman nodded. "We will guide you," he said, "but you must follow exactly. Step where we step. Speak when we speak. The swamp listens." Robb looked at Jon. Jon could see the question in his brother's eyes. Can we trust them? Jon thought of Winterfell's stories, of Howland Reed's loyalty, of the neck's reputation. "Yes," Jon said quietly. "Trust them." Robb inhaled slowly, then nodded. "Lead," he commanded. The crannogmen melted into motion, slipping ahead along the causeway, turning off onto a narrow track that looked like nothing but wet moss until you stepped on it and found firm ground beneath. The column followed, single file, horses snorting, men swearing under their breath. As they moved deeper into the neck, the mist thickened. Sounds changed. Even voices seemed dampened, as if the swamp swallowed words before they could travel. Jon walked beside Tormund for a time, watching the crannogmen move. They were small, yes, but there was a quiet confidence in them that made men with swords seem clumsy. They carried spears tipped with dark metal. Some had nets coiled at their belts. One had a blowpipe slung across his back. "You think they'll help us take that ruin?" Tormund murmured. "They'll help us get to it," Jon said, "and they'll kill anyone who follows." Tormund grunted. "Good," he said. "I like allies who don't talk too much." Jon's shoulder ached. His breath steamed. He tasted swamp air and thought of ice again, of how different cold could be. Sharp and clean beyond the wall, damp and clinging here. As if sensing his thoughts, Ghost pressed close, his flank brushing Jon's leg. Jon reached down and touched the direwolf's fur, grounding himself. Ahead, a crannogman paused and lifted his hand, signaling a stop. The column halted, the silence settling heavy. In the fog, faintly, Jon heard something. Hoofbeats? A distant shout? Then nothing. The crannogman's eyes narrowed. "They follow," he said softly. Robb's face hardened. "Let the neck do its work," he replied. And as they moved on, slipping deeper into the swamp's throat, Jon realized the world was narrowing around them. Into causeways and choke points, into alliances made of necessity, into a war that had stopped being about crowns and started being about survival. The Dreadfort was built to make men feel small. Its stones were dark, its halls narrow, its air cold even in summer. Torches burned low, as if light itself did not like to linger. The walls seemed to drink warmth. Screams, when they happened, did not echo far. The Dreadfort kept its secrets close. Ramsay Snow liked it that way. He stood in a hall lined with flayed men stitched into banners and hung like warnings. The torchlight painted his face in shifting gold and shadow, turning his grin into something that never reached his eyes. Those eyes were pale and bright, like a dog's that had learned to enjoy the sound of bones cracking. A raven message lay open in his hand, the seal broken, the parchment smudged where someone's fingers had trembled. Ramsay read it again as if savoring each word, then let out a laugh that startled the servant cowering nearby. "Well," Ramsay said, voice light, "that's unfortunate." At his feet, Theon Greyjoy knelt with his head bowed, hair hacked short, skin raw in places where pain had been applied with artistry. He wore chains like a second skin. He flinched at Ramsay's laugh, shoulders twitching as if expecting a kick. Ramsay reached down and caught Theon by the chin, forcing his face up. Theon's eyes were haunted, unfocused, the eyes of a man who had been peeled from the inside. "You hear that, Reek?" Ramsay purred, using the name he'd given him like a collar. "My father's been taken." Theon's mouth opened, but no sound came. He swallowed. He whispered, voice broken. "I don't." Ramsay's fingers tightened, digging into bruised skin. "Roose Bolton," he said, enunciating slowly as if teaching a child. "The Lord of the Dreadfort, captured, humiliated, possibly," he shrugged. "Dead soon." Theon blinked. Some distant part of him understood that this mattered, but he could not grasp why. Ramsay watched him with amused contempt. "You know what that means?" Ramsay asked, leaning closer, breath warm against Theon's face. "It means I can't rely on my father to clean up my messes. It means I might have to be responsible." The servant shifted, trying not to be noticed. Ramsay's gaze flicked to him, sharp. "Bring me my dogs," Ramsay said. The servant stumbled into motion, nearly tripping. Ramsay released Theon's chin abruptly. Theon sagged, gasping, eyes dropping to the floor as if he could hide in it. Ramsay paced, boots clicking softly. He stopped at a table where knives lay arranged with neat care. Skinning blades, bone saws, hooks. He ran a finger along one edge as if checking its sharpness. "My father always said," Ramsay mused aloud, "that patience is a weapon, that a man doesn't need to be loved if he is feared, that banners matter, names matter." He smiled. "I like fear," he admitted, "but I like names too." Theon's shoulders trembled. He did not look up. Ramsay turned, crouched in front of Theon so their faces were level. "You took Winterfell once," Ramsay said softly. "Didn't you?" Theon flinked. "I?" Ramsay slapped him. Not hard enough to break bone, hard enough to remind him of who owned his skin. "Answer," Ramsay hissed, still smiling. "Yes," Theon whispered. "I took it." Ramsay's smile widened. "And you lost it," he said, delighted. "You lost it because you're weak, because you wanted love, because you thought being Greyjoy meant something." He leaned in. "But what if I told you, Winterfell is still broken," he murmured. "Burned, empty, carcass. What if I told you a man could walk into it and claim it, and the North, stupid, proud North, might kneel simply because someone is there with a banner and enough cruelty to make it stick?" Theon's eyes flickered, a spark of something like fear sharpening into comprehension. He shook his head, weak. "Robb Stark," he began. Ramsay's eyes glittered. "Ah," he said, and his voice softened into mock sympathy. "The young wolf lived." Theon's breath caught. He looked up fully now, disbelief and something else. Hope, fighting through the fog of pain. Ramsay watched it bloom with fascination, like a child watching a rat realize the trap door is open. "Yes," Ramsay said, voice almost gentle. "Robb Stark crawled out of a wedding with his throat still attached. Isn't that a lovely story?" Theon swallowed, throat working. Then I... His voice broke. He didn't know what he was asking for. Mercy? Death? Escape? Something that didn't exist in this hall. Ramsay stood and stretched as if bored by Theon's confusion. "It changes things," he said. "If Robb Stark returns north, some will rally. Some will fight. Some will remember old loyalties." He shrugged. "And some will be flayed." He turned his head as the distant sound of barking echoed through the stone. His dogs being brought. His expression brightened. "Ah," he said. "There they are." Theon flinched at the sound, his body tightening reflexively. Ramsay glanced down at him and laughed. "Don't worry, Reek," he said. "Not today." He walked toward the doors as men dragged in snarling hounds, their eyes wild, their teeth bared. Ramsay scratched one behind the ears affectionately, the way another man might pet a child. To Moat Cailin, Ramsay said casually, as if discussing a hunt. Send riders. Find out if the Ironborn still hold. If they do, good. If they don't, he smiled, teeth white in torchlight. Then we take it, he finished. Because if father can't be Bolton in the north, I can. The servant swallowed hard. My lord, you are not. Ramsay's gaze snapped to him, cold. Not what? He asked softly. The servant's mouth opened, closed. Not legitimized, he whispered, barely audible. Ramsay stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed again, a bright sound that made the dogs bark louder. Legitimized, Ramsay repeated, as if the word were a joke. Names are taken, he said, not given. He turned away, leaving the servant trembling and Theon kneeling in chains, and strode out with his dogs at his heels, toward war, toward ambition, toward a north already bleeding. Behind him, the flayed man banners shifted slightly in a draft, as if the dead skin sewn into them was trying to crawl away. Moat Cailin rose out of the swamp like a broken jaw. 3 towers remained, half crumbled, leaning at angles that made them look like teeth rotten with age. The old walls had collapsed into heaps of stone and moss, but the causeway still ran through the ruin, narrow and raised above sucking mud. On either side, swamp stretched, misty and dark, dotted with pools that hid who knew what beneath their surface. Ironborn held it, as they had held it for months. Men of the sea stranded in a land that did not love them. Their black and gold armor looked wrong against the green-gray swamp. Their cloaks hung damp and heavy. They stood watch on the towers and the causeway with the stubbornness of men who believed dying here would make them legendary. They did not know the swamp was already killing them slowly. Robb crouched behind a fallen stone wall that stank of wet moss. Jon knelt beside him, shoulder throbbing. Catelyn hovered close, her hood pulled low, eyes narrowed at the ruin as if she could will it to open. Tormund Giantsbane squinted into the fog. That's a sad castle, he murmured. Even your Southron gods wouldn't want it. It's not Southron, Robb muttered. It's ours. Tormund grunted. Then why is it broken? Because it's old, Jon said. And because the world breaks everything eventually. Crannogmen lay hidden in reeds nearby, so still Jon could barely see them. One held a blowpipe. Another had a net ready. Their eyes flicked constantly, tracking Ironborn movement with the patience of hunters who could wait a day to strike if it meant striking clean. How many? Robb asked. 100, the Crannogman guide whispered, voice barely audible. Maybe more, but they are sick. The swamp eats them. They have no fresh water but what they boil. Their supplies rot. Their wounds fester. Robb's mouth tightened. So we starve them, he said. Catelyn's gaze sharpened. How long? She asked, and Jon heard the fear beneath it. Not fear of Ironborn, but fear of delay. Every day they waited was a day Tywin Lannister could move pieces. A day Walder Frey could rebuild his courage. A day winter could deepen. The Crannogman shrugged. They are stubborn, he whispered. It could be days, could be weeks. Robb's jaw clenched. He looked at Jon. We don't have weeks, he said. Jon studied the ruin. The Ironborn had set up their defenses to face the causeway. From the south, any army would have to march straight into their spears and arrows, with swamp to either side. No flanking, no cavalry charge. It was the kind of position that made the Neck famous. It had held back dragons once, people said. It had broken kings. But the Ironborn were not dragons. And Robb was not walking in from the front like a fool. There's another way, Jon said slowly. Tormund's grin flashed. Climb, he said immediately, as if the word tasted sweet. Jon nodded. The towers, he said. They're broken, cracked, not smooth like the twins. Wildlings can climb where Saldy. Heirs can't. If we take one tower at night silently, we can open the gate on the causeway. Or at least kill the men on it. Make a breach. Robb's eyes narrowed, mind working. The swamp's fog will cover us, he murmured. And the Crannogmen can cut off anyone who tries to run into the reeds. Jon added. Catelyn's gaze flicked to the direwolves crouched in mud beside them, ghost white against grime, gray wind dark as wet night. And the wolves? She asked. Jon's mouth tightened. Direwolves were weapons and omens both. When the gate opens, he said, they go first, not to die, to frighten. Tormund chuckled. Fear is a fine blade, he said. Robb's gaze hardened. Risk, he said. Everything is risk, Jon replied. He looked at his brother, and in his eyes he saw the question behind the king's strategy. How much more can we lose? Robb exhaled slowly, then nodded once. Tonight, he decided. We end this. They pulled back into the swamp's cover to plan. Men moved like shadows, whispering, checking weapons, tightening straps. Wildlings sharpened knives with calm focus. Crannogmen mixed something dark in a small pouch, poison, perhaps. Northern soldiers watched them with wary eyes, but the shared enemy ahead kept their hands from turning on each other. As dusk fell, the fog thickened. The ruin vanished into gray, then reappeared in pieces. One tower's silhouette, a flicker of torch, a shout muffled by mist. Robb gathered Jon, Tormund, and the Crannogman guide. Catelyn insisted on being there, her face set as if she refused to let men decide her fate without her hearing. You take the western tower, Robb said to Jon. It's the lowest, most broken, least guarded. Jon nodded, though his shoulders screamed at the thought of climbing. Ghost will come, he said. Tormund grinned. I'll take the middle tower, he said. It looks like it wants to fall over. I'll help it. The Crannogman spoke quietly. We will be in the reeds, he said. If any Ironborn run, they will not run far. Robb's mouth tightened. And when the gate opens, he said, my men surge. No merci. Catelyn's eyes flashed. Mercy was in the hall, she said, voice low. They chose not to take it. Robb looked at her for a heartbeat, then nodded. He said, no merci. Jon rose, adjusting his cloak, feeling the weight of his sword. He glanced at Robb, and for a moment the king's mask slipped and the brother looked through. Come back, Robb said quietly. Jon's throat tightened. I will, he replied, though he did not know if it was truth or just hope shaped into words. Ghost pressed against Jon's leg as if claiming him. Jon crouched and rested his forehead briefly against the direwolf's head, feeling the animal's steady heat. Then the night deepened, and Jon moved into the fog with wildlings at his back, ready to climb into ruin and make it theirs. Stone crumbled under Jon's fingers like old bread. He kept his breath shallow, chest pressed close to the tower's damp face, feeling the cold seep through gloves and into skin. Below him, swamp water glimmered dark in the fog. Above, the broken lip of a ledge waited, slick with moss. Ghost moved below with eerie silence, white fur barely visible in the gray. He did not climb. He did not need to. He watched. Behind Jon, 3 wildlings clung to the wall like spiders. Lean men with calloused hands and a spearwife whose braid was wrapped tight against her skull. They climbed without fear, because fear was for people who had lived safe lives long enough to imagine safety could last. Jon's shoulder burned where the bolt wound pulled under strain. He bit down on pain and hauled himself up, fingers finding a crack, boot toe wedging into a seam. The stone shifted, a small piece falling away with a soft clack. Above, an ironborn guard paced, boots thudding on the tower's interior platform. Jon could hear him muttering, complaining about swamp stink, about rotten food, about how this land was cursed. The ironborn voice was muffled by fog and stone, but the contempt was clear. Jon reached the ledge and flattened himself against it, heart hammering. He waited until the guard's footsteps moved away. Then he moved. He swung a leg over the lip and rolled onto the platform with the quiet urgency of a man who had learned the value of silence beyond the wall. His sword slid free with a whisper. He rose into a crouch. The ironborn guard turned at the faint scrape. His eyes widened, mouth opening. Jon stepped in and drove the sword up under the man's ribs, quick and clean. The guard's breath left in a wet gasp. Jon caught him, lowered him behind a broken battlement, and pressed a hand over his mouth until the gurgling stopped. No song, no screams, just death. The wildlings pulled themselves onto the platform behind him, grinning faintly. The spearwife nodded once, respect in the gesture. "Gate," Jon whispered, pointing toward the tower's inner stair. They moved down the narrow steps, boots careful. The stairwell stank of damp and unwashed bodies. Somewhere below, men coughed, deep, sick coughs. The Ironborn were rotting in this place, pride keeping them chained to misery. At the bottom of the stairs, a door barred their way. Jon pressed an ear to it. He heard voices, two men, perhaps arguing quietly. Jon signaled. The spearwife shifted, knife ready. Another wildling wrapped his hand around the iron bar, muscles tensing. Jon counted silently, 1, 2. They hit the door together. The bar splintered. The door slammed inward, and Jon surged through into a narrow chamber lit by a single guttering torch. Two Ironborn spun, shock on their faces. One reached for his axe. Ghost appeared behind him in a blur of white and teeth, leaping through the broken doorway as if the tower itself had birthed a wolf. Ghost's jaws closed on the man's shoulder and yanked him down. The Ironborn screamed once, then choked as Ghost shook him like prey. The second Ironborn tried to run. A wildling knife took him in the back. He fell, twitching. Jon's breath steamed. He forced himself to look away from Ghost's killing and focus on the chamber's far side, where a narrow passage led out toward the causeway gate mechanism. "Now," Jon whispered. Across the ruin, a distant roar rose, Tormund's voice, loud enough to shake fog. The middle tower erupted into chaos. Torches swung wildly. Ironborn shouted. Then screaming began. Not the neat, controlled screaming of a hall where murder was planned, but the raw, confused screaming of men caught off guard. Tormund was doing his work. Jon ran through the passage and burst into the gatehouse chamber. A winch and chain system sat there, rusted but functional, attached to the heavy gate that blocked the causeway. Two Ironborn guards stood over it, one dozing, the other half awake. They had no time to react. Jon's sword flashed. The first man died with a surprised grunt. The second stumbled back, reaching for a horn, and a wildling spear pinned him to the wall. His horn fell and rolled, silent. Jon seized the winch handle, muscles straining. The chain groaned.
Rust protested.
The gate shuddered. "Help!" Jon hissed through clenched teeth. Wildlings grabbed the winch and shoved. The mechanism moved in a reluctant lurch, then a smoother grind. The gate began to rise, inch by inch, scraping against stone. Outside, on the causeway, Ironborn shouted as they saw the gate lifting without their command. Some ran toward it. Others tried to form a line, spears angling. They did not have time. A howl tore through fog. Grey Wind's voice, deep and fierce. The direwolf hit the Ironborn line like a battering ram, teeth and fury exploding into bodies. Men screamed. Spears jabbed uselessly against thick fur. Grey Wind ripped a man down and vaulted over him into another, moving with terrifying grace. Then Robb Stark charged. He came through the rising gate at the head of his men, sword in hand, cloak streaming, face set in a fury that looked almost holy. Northern soldiers surged behind him, roaring, relief and vengeance pouring out together. Crannogmen slipped alongside, silent and deadly, their small forms darting into gaps, blades flashing. The Ironborn tried to hold. They were brave in their way. They fought with stubborn pride, shouting about the drowned god and iron price. But sickness had weakened them, and surprise had cracked their defenses, and wolves had turned fear into panic. Jon stepped out onto the causeway and saw the ruin alive with movement. Wildlings spilling from the towers, Ironborn scrambling, Northerners pushing forward. In the fog, it all felt like a dream of violence, half-seen and sharp. Tormund appeared atop the middle tower's broken battlement, silhouetted against the gray, his axe raised. He bellowed something obscene and triumphant and hurled a burning torch down. N onto a knot of Ironborn trying to regroup. The torch hit damp cloaks and straw and tar-smeared wood. Fire caught anyway, stubborn as hatred. Jon found Robb in the chaos, cutting down an Ironborn who lunged at him. Robb's eyes met Jon's for a heartbeat. Gratitude, fierce and unspoken. Then Robb turned back to the fight as if his body knew no other language now. By dawn, it was done. The fog thinned, revealing the ruins' full ugliness. Stones slick with blood, bodies sprawled at wrong angles, swamp water stained dark where it lapped at the causeway's edges. The remaining Ironborn knelt with hands bound, faces grim. A few had fled into the swamp, but the crannogmen had promised they would not get far. Jon believed them. Robb stood in the center of the causeway, chest heaving, hair damp with mist. He lifted his sword and pointed it north, beyond the ruin, beyond the swamps. "Home," he said, voice hoarse. Men murmured the word like a prayer. Home. After halls of treachery and roads of mud, home sounded like something worth bleeding for. Jon leaned against a stone, his shoulder throbbing, watching Ghost lick blood from his paws with calm indifference. Gray wind paced restlessly, still keyed for violence. His fur bristling as if he could not yet accept the fight was over. A raven landed on a broken battlement above them, black wings beating, feathers slick with damp. It tilted its head, watching the field of death as if deciding whether it was safe to drop a message among such hungry men. The bird carried a scroll. Jon's stomach tightened as he climbed the broken steps and reached for it. The wax seal was black. Night's Watch. He broke it with stiff fingers and read. The words were blunt, written with the harsh clarity of men who believed law could keep the world from falling apart. Jon Snow is hereby declared a deserter. Return to Castle Black at once to face judgment. The free folk gather in great number beyond the wall under Mance Raider. The watch bleeds. We need every sword. Signed in a firm, angry hand, Alliser Thorne. And beneath it, smaller, shakier, as if added later, Bowen Marsh. Jon stared at the parchment until the letters blurred. Behind him, Robb's voice called, "Jon." Jon turned slowly, the raven scroll heavy in his fist like a sentence. The dawn light caught on Robb's face, making him look older than he had any right to. Catelyn stood beside him with Arya tucked close, her hand gripping her daughter's shoulder as if she still did not trust the world not to steal her again. Robb's eyes flicked to the black wax. "The wall?" he asked. Jon swallowed. His throat felt tight as a noose. "The watch," he said. "They want me back." He didn't add the rest at once, but the words pressed against his teeth, demanding air. "Mance Raider is moving," Jon finished, voice low. "And the wall is about to face the war I tried to tell you about." Snow began to fall again, light and soft, drifting down onto broken stone and drying blood as if the world were trying, futilely, to cover what men had done. Robb stared north, and the north stared back. Vast, cold, waiting. And Jon Snow stood between two Judys, both sharpened by winter, both demanding blood.